Good morning. As is my practice, I'll wait a few moments and then get started with our introductions this morning. All right, good morning. I'll go ahead and get started. It is August 29th, 2024, and I'm Nicole Kinsey, presiding hearing officer for the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is the hearing on the pending petition for assignment of state filed application 25517 and accompanying water right application 25517X01, and the pending request for release from priority of state filed applications 25513, 25514, 25517, unassigned portion, 22235, 23780, and 23781 in favor of water right application 25517X01 of Sites Project Authority. The hearing today, as you all know, is being conducted by Zoom teleconference only. We are not in person today. This hearing is also being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. So if you are not planning to speak today, please use the YouTube channel for viewing the hearing rather than logging into the Zoom platform. The audio and video are being recorded, and we will post files of this recording in the FTP folder for this proceeding shortly after usually by the next morning. And the YouTube recording will also be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. If at any time you are experiencing technical difficulties trying to communicate with us today or accessing Zoom, please send an email to the Sites email inbox at sites-wr-application@waterboards.ca.gov or to the AHO email inbox. AHO staff will be monitoring that inbox today. As has been our practice, we will take breaks as needed. We will take about an hour for lunch, and we will have a hard stop at 5 p.m. Once again, today, Ms. Mullen will be handling the exhibits this morning, all day. So if you're an attorney or a witness and would like a particular exhibit shown on the screen, please feel free to ask Ms. Mullen directly for her to bring that up. As I did yesterday, I'm just going to carry over appearances essentially from the day before. And with that, I think that's all of the basic background we need to go through. Where we left off yesterday was with we completed panel 2 of the authority's witnesses. I believe we are planning to pick up this morning with panel 3. But before we jump right in, I wanted to look to the room and see if there are procedural issues we should address before we get started. I will look to you first, Mr. King.
Thank you, presiding officer Kunze. So my understanding is that I've used 182 minutes of a lot of 240.
If that's what is on the spreadsheet, I haven't looked at the spreadsheet.
So I have 58 minutes left. And I just note that in my estimate, I estimated I would use 165 minutes. So I'm 17 over what I requested. So if you today, if your staff could let me know when I've used up 30 minutes, I plan to stop at that point and reserve, I think about 28 minutes maybe for future, including open statement. At this point, I don't expect to give testimony. And I may ask Mr. Ombaum for some time in the future, but I understand. I understand this is from point of efficiency, and that I tried to make a case for the 8 hours, and I know you took that consideration. So I thank you for that. The other point is regarding what you mentioned about my proposed testimony yesterday. I mentioned property rights right off the bat. Riparians mentioned several times the document I expected you to, I didn't understand the process, but I expect you asked me to narrow my proposed testimony. I don't think there's going to be any surprises here. I've been, as you probably noticed, I've been in coordination. I've been sending documents to Sites Authority to Ali Forces for a couple of years. Nothing's new. The one thing I would say is that riparian rights are part of property rights, and I mentioned that, and I mentioned riparian habitat a couple times in my proposed testimony. I mentioned riparian in my
I
protest.
understand, Mr. King. Why are we talking about this? I just want to make sure I understand.
Because you said I wasn't going to have time to assert my riparian rights in my testimony. Because I didn't mention riparian. You said you did a word check, and I never mentioned riparian, which I mentioned property rights and also riparian habitat a couple times.
Understood. You did mention, yes, both of those
Okay.
things. And I just
And
want to be clear, Mr. King.
yeah,
And I understand you may not be giving a summary of your written testimony. I've read your written testimony. I've read it carefully, as you know, because I know what words are in it. If you were to give a summary of your testimony, and this will come up on rebuttal as well, what you speak in this proceeding cannot be outside of the scope of what you wrote down, and it cannot be in more detail than what you wrote down. The written testimony is the chance to be detailed. What we say orally in this hearing during the day is intended to be a summary, a subset of what you included in your written testimony.
well, I didn't understand that, and I submitted 67 documents. I worked really hard to participate in this hearing. And if I understand that's the rules of your proceeding, that's fine. This is how this proceeding is going to be. It's a gigantic complex, and I understand the efficiency. My last question is, can I bring I expected my protests to be part of your consideration. Can I make those exhibits and mention those in my opening statement at the time I reserve? Because I have a lot of very important property right issues, and I talked about riparian rights there, and a gigantic historical context that I spent. I've been spending.
Mr. King, let me cut to the chase here. My understanding, and I think I may have slightly misspoke in our prior discussion, so let me clarify this. My understanding is that your protest is an AHO exhibit. At a certain point in this proceeding, I believe when we're all completely done with cases in chief, we will consider whether to move those AHO exhibits into the evidentiary record. So you can reference those exhibits in your opening statement, and we will get to a point where we consider moving those protests into the evidentiary record. I expect they would come in. We haven't made that decision yet, but at that time I would hear any objections associated with those. So those are, I don't know what AHO number yours in particular is off the top of my head, but my understanding is that all of the protests that were submitted have been identified as AHO exhibits and are on our FTP site. So you may reference them in your opening statement.
Well, thank you. If your staff could let me know when I use 30 minutes today, I would appreciate that, and I'll stop. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mr. Rees.
Good morning. Yes, I just wanted to state that Mr. Herrick's going to participate in our cross-examination today. He's present this morning. So when we get to our turn, I'll have some cross. Mr. Herrick will have cross, and Ms. Meserve may have some limited cross on a specific topic or two.
Thank you. That's helpful. And we did receive an email from Mr. Herrick as well with, I believe, with an exhibit.
Good. So, I wanted to confirm that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other procedural issues we should address this morning? Now, so I'm going to exercise my discretion as a hearing officer. I have a legal question for you, Mr. Hitchings, Mr. Ferguson, about the authority's position. I know I'm putting you on the spot, so if the answer is we need to think about this and then come back to you, that I understand that. But I was thinking last night about these issues, as one does, and my question is related to the portion of the water code that applies to the assignment of state filed applications, specifically section 10505, which is the provision that well, it states, it's short, so I'll read it. No priority under this part shall be released, nor assignment made of any application that will, in the judgment of the board, deprive the county in which the water covered by the application originates of any such water necessary for the development of the county. And I was thinking about how that relates to existing water rights that are junior to the 1977 priority date of this state filed application that is at issue. And junior water rights that are for uses and have places of use within the county. And I'm wondering if it's your position that, or your understanding of this provision, that it applies to effectively subordinate the 1977 state filed application to existing junior rights, or is it your position that there is not such a effective subordination? And that's my question. I'm just working through what the law means, and that's and exploring this issue.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, hearing officer. Sorry, I think we have a feedback issue. 1 second.
Sure.
Your volume off. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's better.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I think you had telegraphed our response on this pretty well, that I think we need to think about that. We had intended to cover that in the closing briefs on this, since it is a legal issue. And so I think right now we're not prepared to answer that direct legal question. But we had intended to cover that as part of the closing briefs, or possibly some interim step that you might find helpful during the process itself. But I would say that the important thing, maybe the important factual underpinning of looking at that question, is CITES is not requesting an area of origin priority as part of their application for this. So I think that's an important factual point that would bear on the analysis.
I don't, and I completely appreciate that we need to have this conversation later, but the last sentence I did not understand. What do you mean by CITES is not claiming area of origin priority?
For the CITES water right, for CITES itself, they are not claiming an area of origin priority to be attached to their permit or any permit that's issued on this. Now there might be members of CITES that at some point may still pursue area of origin claims apart and aside, but for the purposes of the water that would be appropriated under this permit, CITES is not requesting an area of origin priority. So they're just claiming that they're just seeking the assignment date that was attached to 25517, which is the 1977 priority date.
Okay, thank you. And as you think about this, and I appreciate you need to think about it, part of the direction my question was wondering if for rebuttal we can narrow some of the issues depending on what the authority's position was. And that may or may not be the case. I can understand you want to get to sort through all of this and get to closing briefs, so that's fine. But I appreciate your response this morning.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stork.
Just a clarifying observation or question. I think you're having a discussion about the county of origin rather than the area of origin provisions of the water code here.
That's correct. We're looking at the water code provision 10505. Yes,
right,
which refers to the county.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. All right, with that, Mr. Hitchings or Mr. Ferguson, are you prepared to call up your third panel of witnesses?
Yes, we are. And I believe all the witnesses are here.
And
Do you
if
need me
you,
to provide the names or do you have those?
I have them, but actually, if you wouldn't mind reading names for the rest of my team, it'd be helpful.
Yeah, certainly. So Steve Miko, Samane Sadat, Chad Whittington, Kyle Winslow, and Jeff Davids.
I don't, to my team, how many can you pin? Let's see. Can we get everyone up here just for purposes of administering the oath? It would be helpful. We're close. I believe we're missing. There we go. All right. Good morning to all of you. I'm now going to administer the oath. So if you would please take yourselves off of mute and raise your right hand. Mr. Miko, Mr. Davids, Ms. Sadat, Mr. Winslow, and Mr. Whittington, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do.
Let the record reflect that all of the witnesses confirmed in the affirmative. Thank you. And with that, I will turn things over to you, Mr. Ferguson, with the first witness of your choice. And you are on mute.
Great, thank you. So this is the authority's third panel, and the purpose of this panel is to describe the project modeling conducted to assess potential project impacts, including the CalSim II modeling, DSM-2 modeling, what's called the HEC 5Q modeling, reclamation temperature model, site's release temperature blending tool, and the C=W2 modeling. This panel will describe the results from this modeling for deliveries to contractors, delta exports, reservoir storage, and river flows. They'll also describe delta water quality, river temperature, and sites reservoir release temperatures, among other issues. Additionally, Dr. Davids will address groundwater recharge. So we're going to proceed with Mr. Miko first, and then we'll go to Mr. Whittington, and then Dr. Sadat, Dr. Winslow, and Dr. Davids. So, Mr. Miko, please state your name for the record.
Stephen Miko.
Is Exhibit 108 an accurate statement of your written testimony?
Yes.
And did you prepare that written testimony?
Yes, I did.
And is Exhibit Cites 270 an accurate summary presentation of your written testimony?
That is correct.
And did you prepare that summary presentation?
Yes, I did.
And then is Exhibit 246 an accurate statement of your qualifications?
Yes.
Okay. And does Cites 247, which was submitted with your written testimony and cited therein, include a true and correct copy of documentation concerning project modeling?
Yes.
All right, at this time, can we please bring up 270? And Mr. Miko, you can go ahead and summarize your testimony.
Okay. Good morning, Hearing Officer Kenzie, members of the board, members of the public. Today I'm going to speak to project modeling integration. And I apologize in advance to Ms. Mullen. I'm going to be dancing around these slides a little bit. Ms. Mullen, could you please go down 2 pages on this PDF? Thank you. Today's presentation will include a brief overview of the primary models used to evaluate changes in water supply, water quality, delta water levels, and river water temperatures. Then I will finish my presentation summarizing conclusions in my written testimony that underscore that these models are generalized and simplified representations of a complex system. Ms. Mullen, could you go back 1 slide, please? On this slide, I have a simple flow chart that includes the primary models to evaluate the changes I described on my previous slide. I could bring everyone's attention to the top left corner of this slide with the box that has a title of Hydrology and System Operations. System operations are modeled by the CalSim II model. This model operates at a monthly time step and generates river flows, delta exports, reservoir storages, and deliveries. The results from this model are then used to inform the subsequent models on this slide. I could bring everyone's attention to the right of the CalSim model with the box that's titled River Water Temperature. River water temperature is simulated with two different models: the HEC5Q model for simulating river water temperature on the Sacramento and American rivers, and the reclamation temperature model for simulating river water temperature on the Feather River. The HEC5Q model operates on a 6-hour time step, while the reclamation temperature model operates on a monthly time step. These models rely on reservoir storage and river flow outputs from the CalSim II model in combination with meteorological boundary conditions to simulate reservoir and river water temperature. Now, if I may bring everyone's attention to the left-hand side of this slide, to the boxes beneath the CalSim II box. Immediately below CalSim, we have a box titled Delta Hydrodynamics. Delta Hydrodynamics are simulated with a submodule of DSM2, DSM standing for Delta Simulation Model. This submodule is called DSM2 Hydro, as one would understand, representing hydrodynamics. This model simulates flows, velocities, and stage through the Sacramento and San Joaquin River Delta. This model relies on river flow inputs from the Sacramento, San Joaquin rivers, for example, into the Delta, and Delta exports from the CalSim II model. In combination with Delta island consumptive use and a tidally varying stage boundary condition at the downstream end of the Delta, which is at Sacramento River at Martinez. This model operates on a 15-minute time step to capture the stage variation of the tides as they change throughout the day and how those propagate throughout the Sacramento and San Joaquin River Delta. Finally, these results from DSM2 Hydro are used to inform the transport of salinity throughout the Delta, which is modeled with another model titled DSM2 Qual, short for quality. This model will take the hydrodynamics from DSM2 Hydro and salinity boundary conditions at the river inflow locations to the Delta and at the oceanside boundary condition of the Delta, Sacramento River at Martinez, to then simulate the transport of that salinity throughout the Delta. This model also operates on a 15-minute time step consistent with DSM2 Hydro and generates salinity results in units of electrical conductivity, or EC. I also would like to note that electrical conductivity results may be converted to other salinity constituents, such as chloride, or Cl, through regression equations. Ms. Mullen, could you please advance 2 slides again? Now, I'm going to briefly summarize concluding statements from my written testimony on the appropriate use of models. I'd like to summarize that CalSim II operates on a monthly time step. The CalSim II model results are only useful in a comparative analysis where a with project condition is compared to a without project condition. I'd also like to note that CalSim model results may differ from real-time operations because not all real-time operational adjustments are modeled. CalSim is not able to capture the week-to-week decisions made by a water operations management team or a Sacramento River temperature targeting group. And finally, since the CalSim II model outputs are used to inform the remaining models that we're discussing, the assumptions and limitations associated with CalSim II must be considered when evaluating the results from these other models. And with that, I conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Miko. Mr. Whittington? Will you please state your name for the record?
Chad Whittington.
Would you mind repeating that?
Chad Whittington.
Thank you. Is Exhibit Sites 109 an accurate statement of your written testimony?
Yes.
And did you prepare that written testimony?
Yes.
And is Exhibit Sites 278 an accurate summary presentation of your written testimony?
Yes.
And did you prepare that summary presentation?
Yes.
Is Sites 245 an accurate statement of your qualifications?
Yes.
Do Sites Exhibits 240, 241, 242, 243, and 244, which you submitted with your written testimony and cited therein, contain true and correct copies of documentation concerning CalSim modeling and CalSim II analyses for the sites project?
Yes, I believe they do.
At this time, would you please summarize your written testimony using Sites Exhibit 278?
Yes.
Bring that up.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Ms. Smolin, could you please go to the next page? Yeah, just a bit of introduction. I'm an engineer at Jacobs, been working there since 2016, and I've been spending pretty much all my time working on water resource modeling in California with a specific focus on CVP and SWP project operations. And I've been working on the modeling component of sites projects since I started working at Jacobs. And the testimony I'm presenting today will be on the CalSim II modeling conducted for sites project, with a specific focus on what was conducted for the final EIR-EIS 2023. Ms. Wong, could you please go to the next page? So CalSim was used to evaluate potential effects of sites project operations on water resources. It is a monthly simulation model developed and maintained by DWR and Reclamation to evaluate CVP and SWP operations, in addition to operations of many other facilities in California. It simulates reservoir operations, river flows, diversions, exports, and deliveries using hydrologic information from water years 1921 through 2003. The typical use of CalSim includes comparative analysis between different operational scenarios. These analyses include an environmental baseline scenario, which is referred to as no action alternative, or NAA. And the NAA CalSim model in the sites EIR-EIS included existing infrastructure, existing projected demands, and existing regulations in 2020. This model adopted assumptions and logic included in the CalSim II baseline developed by DWR and Reclamation in November of 2021. So the representation of regulations such as the 2019 BIOPS and the 2020 SWP ITP, for example, was made consistent with what was modeled in Reclamation's 2021 benchmark study. Alternative 3 represents the adopted proposed project for sites operations in the final EIR-EIS, and the Alternative 3 CalSim II model was developed by basically adding sites reservoir and its corresponding proposed facilities and operations to the NAA model. Ms. Mullen, could you please go to the next page? Diversions through the TC Canal in the model are routed through Funk's Reservoir and then into Sites Reservoir. Diversions are limited to 2100 CFS through Funk's, and diversions through the GCID main canal are routed through the terminal regulating reservoir and then into Sites Reservoir. Diversions are limited to a maximum of 1800 CFS through the TRR pumping plant. And the model includes different sub-accounts within the reservoir to track storage for the different storage partners or participants of the project and for the Proposition 1 ecosystem benefits. Releases from sites may be conveyed through either Funk's Reservoir or the TRR when water is released, it is conveyed through the TC canal to the Dunnigan pipeline and into the Colusa Basin drain. There's a 1,000 CFS conveyed capacity through the Dunnigan pipeline. Releases intended for south of Delta participants may be conveyed through the Jones or Banks pumping plants, the North Bay Aqueduct, or the Contra Costa Water District's pumping plants. Can you please go to the next page? Diversions to sites may only occur when the Sacramento River is not fully appropriated, or in other words, between September 1st through June 14th. Since CalSim II simulates operations on a monthly time step, it estimates June diversions by computing half of the flow available in that month based on all the other model diversion criteria. So additionally, the model only allows diversions when Shasta is not releasing water to meet spring pulse criteria, which exists as part of the baseline operations without sites project. And diversions may only occur when the delta is in excess conditions and not in balance conditions as defined by the Coordinated Operations Agreement between CBP and SWP. And then the next page includes some additional diversion criteria. So thank you. I don't plan to go into this in too much detail here, but it is all documented in my written testimony in the EIR. But sites diversions are restricted during pulse events monitored in the Sacramento River at Bend Bridge. The hydrologic thresholds used to determine a pulse were coordinated on between our fisheries and aquatic teams and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. A separate model called the Upper Sacramento River Sacramento or Daily Operations Model is used to estimate flow rates at Bend Bridge and then determine how many days pulse protection would be in effect for each month. This information is then fed in as an input to the CalSim model. Sites diversions are also only permitted when bypass flow requirements at each intake location and Wilkins Slough are satisfied, and diversions are also modeled to be copacetic with regulatory requirements downstream, including flow and salinity objectives that are all included as part of the baseline regulatory environment and modeled in the no action alternative. Can you please go to the next slide? The CalSim model simulates releases through the Dunnigan pipeline, which connects the TC canal to the Colusa Basin drain. It also includes a few exchange operations. Real-time exchanges are implemented when releases from the sites are provided to local participants of the project in lieu of Sacramento River diversions through the GCID main canal. And then the purposes of the Oroville and Shasta exchange operations are to allow sites releases to be made during times when it would be beneficial to maintain upstream storage levels to support water supply and temperature management objectives. The Oroville exchange operation is implemented by having sites release water in June through July to meet downstream objectives that otherwise would have been met through releases from Oroville, and Oroville would then release the exchange water in August through November. This exchange may occur in below normal, dry, and critical water year types. In the Shasta exchange, releases from sites are provided primarily in the spring for CVP uses in lieu of releases from Shasta, and this operation is meant to occur in dry and critical water year types. Can you please go to the next page? Thank you. So the next set of slides present CalSim results comparing the no action alternative with alternative 3. And the figures I'm going to show demonstrate long-term comparative analysis of scenarios with and without sites project. Next slide, please. Okay, so these bar charts show average annual deliveries for various CVP contract types. The black bars represent NAA and the purple bars represent sites project. There is a pair of bars for each water year type, and the first pair of bars on each chart represents the long-term average over the full 82-year period that's simulated by CalSim. And the y-axis on each of these charts shows the volume of water in 1,000 acre feet. So water deliveries to CVP settlement contractors, wildlife refuges, and exchange contractors are all nearly identical to alternative 3 and the NAA, as shown by these charts. More specifically, long-term average and critical year type deliveries to these contractors in Alt 3 are within 1,000 acre feet of what is supplied in the NAA. Next page, please. These charts show average annual deliveries to CVP north of Delta Ag and M&I. Deliveries to these contractors are particularly sensitive to changes in facility operations and or regulatory requirements placed on the SWP or CVP, as they may vary greatly from year to year based on reservoir storage conditions, hydrology, and regulatory conditions. Long-term average annual deliveries to CVP north of Delta water service contractors is slightly greater under alternative 3 than under the NAA. Such increases are mostly reflected in dry and critical years. Compared to the NAA, alternative 3 provides 8,000 acre feet of additional delivery to CVP agriculture and M&I contractors in dry years, and 6,000 acre feet of additional delivery in critical years. Next page, please. This slide shows SWP deliveries to north of Delta users and Feather River service area contractors. And as shown by these charts, alternative 3 does not have a long-term effect on these deliveries. Next page, please. The majority of project water service deliveries of the SWP and CVP are to contractors south of the Delta. The simulated long-term average annual delivery to SWP and CVP south of Delta water service contractors is 27,000 acre feet higher under alternative 3 as compared to the NAA, which is about a 0.5% increase. Alternative 3 provides more average annual deliveries to these south of Delta contracts in above normal, dry, and critical year types. Next slide, please. So this chart shows, it's a probability of exceedance chart of average annual SWP and CVP Delta exports through the Jones and Banks pumping plants. This chart shows that in the 82-year period, the highest modeled annual export volume is just above 7 million acre feet, and the lowest modeled annual export volume is a little above 2 million acre feet. Compared to the NAA, alternative 3 has a modest increase in exports. The increase reaches up to about 200,000 acre feet per year. Delta export increases under sites project occur primarily during the drier year types when sites releases are being conveyed through the Delta for south of Delta users. Okay, next page, please. This slide presents probability of exceedance charts for end of September storage at Trinity, Shasta, Oroville, and Folsom. Storage in September is a useful metric since it's reflective of what is carried over into the forthcoming year. For the most part, simulated end of September storage conditions at Shasta, Oroville, and Trinity reservoirs under alternative 3 are similar or higher than the NAA across the entire range of hydrologic conditions. For Shasta, alternative 3 provides about 100,000 acre feet increase to end of September storage, which is due to a combination of the Shasta exchange and the CVP operational flexibility operations included in that scenario. Alternative 3 assumes federal investment of the project, which means that one of the sub-accounts in sites reservoir is owned by reclamation, which can be used to back up water into Shasta and reflected by this chart. Next page, please. Thank you. These bar charts show average annual river flows at a few key locations. The first presents Sacramento River flow at Bend Bridge, which shows that alternative 3 is within a percentage point or two of the NAA for each year type. And further down the river, downstream of sites diversions, Sacramento River flow at Wilkins Slough remains similar between all three, and the NAA flow is slightly lower under alternative 3 than the NAA in wet and below normal years. In the long term, flow at Wilkins Slough is 0.7% lower in alternative 3 than in the NAA. However, alternative 3 also shows a slightly greater level of flow in dry and critical year types. And the Feather River and American River flows from NAA and alternative 3 are within a few CFS of each other over the long term and for each year type. Ms. Mullen, could you please go to the next page? Thanks. This slide shows average annual flows in the Sutter bypass and the Yellow bypass. Both flows are lower in alternative 3 than in the NAA, which is primarily due to a reduction in weir spills caused by sites diversions. For the Sutter bypass, the effect on a long-term average annual basis is a 6.6% reduction, and for the Yellow bypass, it's a 2.3% reduction. However, sites releases to the Yellow bypass cause flow increases relative to the NAA in August through October, which can be seen a little bit in the bottom chart, which is a monthly pattern chart of Yellow bypass flows. All right, next page, please. And this slide just presents a summarization of the results we just walked through. So under alternative 3, with sites project, deliveries to various CDP and SWP contract types were provided at a similar level to the NAA or higher. And by a similar level, I'm talking about changes within a percentage or two over the long term. There is an increase of up to 100,000 acre feet per year in long-term average SWP and CDP exports under alternative 3. And this is equivalent to about a 2% increase in the long term. Alternative 3 shows similar or higher levels of end of September storage in major SWP and CVP reservoirs, with the most noticeable increase to Shasta storage. Sacramento River flows downstream of sites diversions are reduced by a little under 1% in the long term, and sites diversions cause reductions to weir spills going into the Sutter and Yellow bypasses in the winter and early spring. But sites includes dedicated releases for the Yellow bypass in August through October, which elevates flow in these months relative to the NAA. And that concludes my presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whittington.
Dr. Sadat, you're next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samana Sadat.
Morning. Dr. Sadat, is Exhibit Sites 110 an accurate statement of your written testimony?
It is.
And did you prepare that written testimony?
Yes, I did.
Is Exhibit Sites 273 an accurate summary presentation of your written testimony?
Yes, it is.
Did you prepare that summary presentation?
I did.
And is Exhibit Sites 248 an accurate statement of your qualifications?
Yes, it is.
And do Sites Exhibits 249 through 256, which were submitted with your written testimony and cited therein, contain true and correct copies of documentation concerning DSM II and temperature modeling?
Yes, they are.
At this time, I'd like you to summarize your written testimony using Sites Exhibit 273.
Sure. Good morning, Officer Kenzie and the members of the board and public members. My name is Samana Sadat. I'm a water resources modeler at Jacobs. My presentation is a summary of my testimony, which includes DSM-2, HEC5Q, reclamation temperature model results, in addition to sites release temperature blending tool that are provided in the final EIR EIS. If we can go to the next slide, please. Here's an outline of my presentation. I'll provide a brief overview of my testimony, then providing model results for DSM-II model, followed by water temperature results, and I'll finish with a conclusion. If you can go, please, to the next slide. My testimony provides computational modeling performed to evaluate changes in the water quality, delta water levels, and river water temperatures, and temperature blending analysis associated with the size release alternative 3, which is the preferred alternative for final EIS. The modeling results that I show here, and it's also provided in Exhibit 273, reflect a comparison between alternative 3 and the no action alternative. And I'd like to emphasize that I rely on testimonies provided by Mr. Whittington, Mr. Miko, and Dr. Carl Winslow, especially the CalSim II outputs that fits into DSM-II and water temperature models, and the C=W2 outputs that fit into sites release temperature blending tool. If we can go to the next slide, please, Ms. Mullen. Thank you. First, I'm going to summarize the DSM-II model results. DSM-II is a one-dimensional hydrodynamic and water quality simulation model that is used to simulate the hydrodynamics and water quality in the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta. DSM-II model results are used to inform the understanding of the water quality effects of the project, including changes in electrical conductivity and chloride concentration, in addition to water level effects in the delta. Next slide, please, Mr. Moore. Thank you. Let's dive into some of the water quality results. I'll begin here with electrical conductivity, which I will refer to as EC from now on. Model results show that in general, alternative 3 has similar monthly average EC as compared to no action alternative at most locations throughout the delta. Water rights decision 1641, the agricultural water quality objectives for the western and interior delta are specified April 1st to August 15, with actual EC threshold varying depending on water year types. And DSM-II results indicated that at these locations from April through August, simulated monthly average EC values for alternative 3 are similar to the no action alternative. One thing to note is that CalSim II prioritizes meeting these 1641 water quality objectives for both no action alternative and alternative 3. Therefore, the water quality results for alternative 3 and the no action alternative at these locations are similar during the period in which the SWP and CVP operates to meet their responsibilities for the 1641. These 1641 South Delta agriculture water quality objectives vary at different months, but again, for all months, the simulated monthly average EC values for all 3 and the no action alternatives are similar. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Chloride concentrations are estimated based on the DSM-II results using a relationship between EC and chloride, which is derived from historical water quality data for the West Delta and also the DSM-II EC outputs. Since the data from West Delta is used, this regression is only valid for the West Delta. The estimated chloride concentration results at Old River at Rock Slough, Old River near Clifton Court, and Barker Slough indicated that the monthly average chloride concentration for the no action and alternative 3 stay below the threshold of 250 milligram per liter at all months. There are 3 municipal diversion locations where bromide may be of concern, and these locations are North Bay Aqueduct at Barker Slough, Sacramento River at Mallard Island, and San Joaquin River at Antioch. And because there is a relationship between bromide and chloride, there is a formula that calculates bromide based on chloride concentration. And this relationship is approximately the same in many areas in the delta. And based on the estimated chloride at these diversion locations, which showed little to no change in chloride, it is expected that there will be no change or little change in bromide as well. If we can go to the next slide, please. And the probability of meeting the 1641 water quality objectives are also evaluated using DSM-2 water quality results. Model results show that the no action operations generally meet the 1641 ag water quality objectives most of the time. It also indicates a similar ability for operations under alternative 3 compared to no action to meet the 1641 water quality objectives at all locations, as you can see here for a few different locations. Probability of meeting the 1641 at Sacramento River at Emeton is shown here on the top right graph. Probability of meeting the 1641 at San Joaquin River at Jersey Point is shown on the top left. San Joaquin River at San Andreas Landing is the bottom right graph, and then the South Fork McCollum River at Terminus is the bottom left. In these graphs, the x-axis indicates the probability of meeting the 1641 water quality objectives, and the y-axis is the differences in EC between the alternative and the standard. Black solid line here represents the no action, and the purple dashed line shows alternative 3 results. And as you can see here, at San Andreas Landing and Terminus, which are the two bottom graphs, model operation under both no action and all 3 meet these 1641 objectives at all times. If we can go to the next slide, please. We also calculated the number of days in a year meeting the 1641 M&I water quality objectives at Contra Costa Canal intake. As shown in this graph, the y-axis here indicates the number of days in a year that chloride concentration is less than 150 milligram per liter, which is the standard. And the x-axis indicates years from 1922 through 2003. The black line here represents the results for no action alternative, and the purple line shows the same results for alternative 3, and blue area represents the standard. As it shows here, we can see that no action alternative and alternative 3 operations meet the 1641 for all years except 1977. And one thing I'd like to point is that 1977 in this year, because of the severe drought conditions, barriers were installed at 6 different locations in the Delta to help reduce ocean salinity intrusion and to raise water levels. These barriers are not reflected in the model results here. Therefore, these results do not reflect actual chloride concentrations experienced during the 1977 drought. Another takeaway that I like to point here in this graph is that both no action and alternative 3 operations meet the standard for a greater number of days that is required. If we can go please to the next slide. Now moving on to DSM-2 water level results. From July through November, sites water may be conveyed through the Delta and exported at DWR's Bank Pumping Plant and Reclamation's Jones Pumping Plant to south of Delta, which could sometimes be sometimes higher under the sites project. The increase in exports under the sites project could affect Delta water levels. When water is exported, increased pumping could affect water flow and tidal energy in areas surrounding the export facilities. And reduction in water levels could affect legal users of water in the South Delta. To minimize the potential impacts of Delta water levels, Reclamation and DWR operate temporary barriers in the South Delta. To evaluate the projected changes in water levels, we used the DSM-2 stage model results. We calculated the changes in daily minimum and daily maximum water levels for each day in the 82-year planning simulation period for locations throughout the South Delta between the no action alternative and alternative 3. The long-term and water year type averages of monthly differences at locations upstream and downstreams of the temporary barriers throughout the South Delta are provided in Exhibit 256, but in general, Alternative 3 results show a similar daily minimum and daily maximum water level compared to the no action alternative, and the differences in minimum stage are within 1/10 of a foot. If we can go to the next slide, please. Now moving on to water temperature modeling that includes HEC 5Q model, reclamation temperature model, and sites release temperature blending tool. Ms. Mould, if you could advance the next slide. Thank you. HEC 5Q model was used to estimate water temperatures in the Sacramento and American rivers, and model results showed that at all locations evaluated in Sacramento and American rivers for all months, no action and alternative 3 have very similar water temperatures. Here is an example. You can see the monthly average floods for 2 locations. The top graph shows the simulated temperature results at Sacramento River below Clear Creek, and the bottom graph shows the result for American River at Watt Avenue. Black bars here representing the monthly average temperature in the no action alternative, and the purple bars indicating the results for alternative 3. And as you see here, the model results for all 3 are very similar to no action alternative. If we can go to the next slide. Here we are looking at the results of reclamation temperature model that simulates monthly reservoir and stream temperatures and is used here for evaluating the effects of project on mean monthly water temperatures in the Feather River. Model outputs indicated that at all locations evaluated in the Feather River for all months, no action and all 3 have very similar temperature results. Here again, we can see the results for 2 locations. As an example, the top graph shows the model temperature for Feather River below Fish Dam, and the bottom one shows the results for Feather River at mouths. Again, black bars representing no action alternative, purple bars representing all 3, and again, we see that the results are very similar in all months. If we can go to the next slide, please. The sites release temperature blending tool was used to calculate monthly average temperatures downstream of site reservoirs in Temecula Canal at Finks Reservoir, Gillen-Clusah Irrigation District Main Canal at the Terminal Regulating Reservoir, Clusah Basin Drain at Donegan Pipeline, and Sacramento River below the Clusah Basin Drain. My results indicated that model changes to temperature are very small and are often decreases in water temperature at these locations. And water temperature effects on the Sacramento River associated with returning sites release water would be small and usually is less than 1 degree Fahrenheit. And if we can go to the next slide, this is just a conclusion of my testimony. In summary, differences in water quality between alternative 3 and the no action alternative are negligible or minor at most locations. The no action alternative and alternative 3 meet the 1641 water quality objectives most of the time with a similar or increased ability in alternative 3 as compared with the no action alternative. Monthly averages of minimum water levels in the South Delta are similar under alternative 3 as compared to no action alternative. So it's my opinion that the modeling cannot completely mimic operational decision, but it does show that there will not be negative water quality impacts nor negative effects to legal users of water due to water level changes. HEC 5Q and reclamation temperature model shows similar results in average monthly river water temperature at all evaluated rivers for all 3 as compared with no action alternative. The modeling shows sites releases are expected to usually result in a slight reduction in water temperature in the Sacramento River and Coosa Basin drain. An additional discussion regarding the potential effects associated with changes in salinity and water temperature can be found within the testimony of Ms. Ann Hoover and Fisheries testimony of Dr. Greenwood and Dr. Wilder. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and this includes the summary of my testimony.
Thank you, Dr. Sadat.
Thank you. Dr. Winslow,
Yes,
can you please state your name for the record?
Kyle Winslow.
And is Exhibit Sites 111C an accurate statement of your written testimony?
Yes,
And did you prepare that written testimony?
yes, I did.
And is Exhibit Sites 280 an accurate summary presentation of your written testimony?
Yes,
And did you prepare that summary presentation?
yes, I did.
And is Sites 257 an accurate statement of your qualifications?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I would like you to now summarize your written testimony using Sites Exhibit 280. So if we can bring that up, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'll be testifying today on the Sites Reservoir C-equal W2 modeling analysis that was conducted for the 2023 EIR, as well as some more recent results that take into account climate variability. Next slide, please. Just as an introduction, I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of California. I've been employed at Jacobs since 1995. I have 3 engineering degrees from UC Berkeley, all related to civil and environmental engineering. My PhD is in environmental fluid mechanics. I have over 30 years of experience working in Bay Area water resources modeling, and I led the development and the application of the C-equal W2 model for Sites Reservoir. That will be the focus of my testimony today. Next slide, please. I'd just like to provide an overview of the model itself and the Sites Reservoir application. The model is a widely used model developed originally by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I've been using this model on projects nationwide dating back to 1995. The model is a 2-dimensional model, and that means it looks at changes both downstream in a river, if you will, or longitudinally in a river, as well as vertically in a river. The model is averaged laterally across the reservoir. The model can simulate multiple aspects of water quality, including temperature, dissolved oxygen, nutrients, and algal kinetics. It's a very robust model. The model is driven by results from models that we heard in previous testimonies, specifically by Mr. Whittington. We use daily inflows and outflows provided by the USR DOM model to drive the model. Now, the model is run at the variable time step. It's high resolution model. It's run between roughly 2 and 3 minute time steps. It's run for the full 82-year simulation period. This is what we call our historic hydrology period. And that's done to match both the CalSim and the USR DOM models. That period is 1921, apologize for the typo there, 1921 to 2003. We set up a model grid to physically represent the system, and the Sites Reservoir is broken down into 29 connected segments laterally, and each of those segments has up to 127 vertical layers, each of which are 2 feet thick. So the model represents the reservoir depth of approximately 225 feet to roughly 500-foot elevation. The model uses local meteorological inputs where they're available. Since we're running such a long period simulation, we have to make some assumptions applying the historic record of available meteorological data to the model. And so we take the air temperature and wind speed, we figure out what are reasonable annual patterns or blocks of annual patterns, and then we extend that or copy that back in time to provide inputs for the full 82-year simulation period. One aspect that we'll focus on in the presentation today is the ability of the system to release water at a certain temperature. And while this isn't a regulated or a governed goal, there is there's a goal, if you will, to not influence rice growth in terms of releasing water that's too cold. And so the model will focus on trying to release water that's at least 65 degrees Fahrenheit during certain portions of the year that overlap with the growing period for rice. And we'll talk about that in detail. Next slide, please. So a little more detail on the model input itself. I mentioned the physical grid. That grid, the way it's entered in the model, we put in basically widths for every cell. So we have these vertical layers, as I mentioned. Each of those cells gets a width. And if you integrate over the width of every cell and every segment, you will get what we call a storage elevation curve. And this basically says at each elevation of Sites Reservoir, how much volume is there? And we can match that against previous models, the CalSim model and the USR model, so that we have consistency between the models used in the analysis. The model also requires an input of any inlet or outlet structures. Through the development of the project, there have been different estimates of how that structure would be built. So we'll talk about differences in those as we progress the modeling effort. These inlet and outlet towers have a number of gates, different elevations in the reservoir, and then the sizing of the gates. And so that governs where the water is pulled out of the reservoir. As you can imagine, through the year, the temperature at each gate changes as the thermal structure changes through the year. And so actually the location and the number of those gates significantly influences the ability to meet a certain target temperature. I mentioned that the inflows and the outflows were provided to us by other team members that came out of the USR DOM model. The assumption is that there's negligible other local inputs from the local watershed, so no creeks of any size bring water into Sites Reservoir relative to the magnitude of inflows diverted into the reservoir. The precipitation data we used for the model was taken from a local data set that extended from 1983 to 2018. We took that data and mapped that to the Sacramento Water Year Type Index, and then applied that to our full 82-year simulation. So for example, say there were 8 dry water years between 1983 and 2018. We took the average precipitation from those years from actual data, and then applied that to every dry water year type over the 82-year simulation. The other meteorological inputs, such as air temperature and dew point temperature and wind speed and wind direction, were taken from a local CIMMYS data set. And we had 12 years of solid data there from 2007 to 2018. If you look at the differences on any individual year, they're rather negligible. So we took that block of data and then just repeated that 12-year block back in time for temperature and wind in order to fill out the required inputs for our 82-year simulation. We also need to apply temperature for inflows. This is both diversion inflows and precipitation inflows. The diversion inflows for this at the Sacramento River intake locations were provided by the HEC 5Q simulation. And then for precipitation, the assumption in general is that precipitation temperature is in equilibration with the air temperature. So using the same air temperature that was already in the meteorological inputs, we just assign that temperature to the precipitation itself. And that would complete the temperature balance for the reservoir. Once you have the meteorological influences and all of the inflow volumes are assigned temperatures as well, that gives you all the information you need to run the model. There are some miscellaneous model parameters that I won't bore you with. It's high level fluid mechanics and nonsense. Okay, next slide, please. So our validation, again, I wanted to match previous modeling efforts or modeling efforts conducted by their teammates on this project. And so what you see in the picture is a measure in terms of frequency of stage and storage, specifically storage volume in the reservoir, and as a comparison between the CE-QUAL model and the USR DOM model. So you see a very good agreement at both ends of the range and throughout the whole range. And this just says that the reservoir varies through the 82-year simulation between roughly 80,000 acre feet and 1.5 million acre feet. And both models produce a very similar curve there. In order to match that curve, since there are some distinct differences between the USR DOM model and the more highly resolved lake water quality model, the CEQUAL model. We adjusted the precipitation in order to match that curve. So the precipitation data we used was from a CIMMYS station that was slightly east of the site, further into the valley. So assuming logically there's some type of a rain shadow in the closer to the mountains, closer to the coastal range, we reduced the temperature, we reduced the precipitation in order to match that net volume. So CEQUAL model uses calculated evaporation, where USR DOM uses a monthly prescribed evaporation that's based on some other local reservoirs. So we don't expect there to be an exact match between the USR DOM and the CEQUAL evaporation. So it's the evaporation difference that caused us to reduce the precipitation that we wanted to apply in order to match the USR DOM results in terms of a net evaporation. Next slide, please. I mentioned that this model has gone through different iterations. This is just a very brief summary of a couple of the changes. The modeling was started in the year 2020. For the draft EIR, we used USR DOM results that were dated January and February of 2021. We used a 9-gate inlet and outlet structure for the draft EIR and the historic hydrology from CalSim, that 82-year period. When we redid the modeling to support the final EIR, there were updated versions of USR DOM that were conducted in May of 22. We still use the same hydrology and gate structure, the 9 gates and the historical hydrology. And then recent work conducted this year that I'll report on briefly here today, or summarize briefly here today, was done to account for potential future climate, to answer questions about changes in release water temperature under future climate scenarios. And so for those simulations, we used the April 2024 USR DOM inputs, which are the 2035 CT climate simulations. And we updated to a more recent inlet outlet structure design, which reduced the number of gates from 9 gates down to 7. And of course, they're at different elevations. Now, the seven elevations are consistent with 7 of the 9 previous gates, but the 7-gate structure lost the highest gate elevation. We lost the gate at 490 feet. And we'll talk about the implications of that on release temperature. Next one, please. Okay, so the chart on the right, I'll explain in detail because that will be similar to charts we're going to look at for the next 5 minutes or so. What we're seeing on the chart on the right, it's a frequency distribution of release water temperature. So over time, if we take daily values out of the CEQUAL model, and then we sort those and plot them on a frequency basis, and we filter that here just to show May through September, we have 2 lines. The first line, the blue line, is the results from the EIR. So this was in Appendix 6D of the 2023 final EIR. What we see is that for a good chunk of the period, we're able to meet our 65-degree C target. So in this blue line, for example, between 40 and roughly, say, 94, so say 54% of the time, we're able to meet exactly that target. There are 2 distinct deviations from that target, one at the high end and one at the low end, and I'll explain both of those. The reasons that we can't meet that target, say roughly 7% of the time, 7 or 8% of the time. This generally occurs when the reservoir is low in volume, and then the driving meteorological conditions warm up the reservoir. And so that because you don't have a lot of choices for output because the storage is low, you don't have a lot of vertical levels of those gates that are still wet. When we're releasing water during low storage conditions, the water is generally higher than 65 degrees. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we start to deviate from the 65. We can still hold pretty close to it within, say 2 or 3 degrees for all but, say, the lowest 20% of the time. The reason we can't hold the temperature target at the low end is related to the location of those gates. If you imagine the thermal structure in the reservoir, we have warm water in the top and cold water in the bottom. The distinction between those 2 zones is called a thermocline. the vertical position of that thermocline changes throughout the year. And if you have a shallow thermocline and your first available gate is in the colder water pool, then we can't release water that meets 65. So when we deviate below 65, it's generally because of the location of the gate relative to the thermocline. And the distinct difference between the blue and the red line, although the red line reflects two changes, it's both the new climate factors, so warmer temperature, more precipitation. It also has that newer gate structure. So the reason there's more difference between the blue and the red lines on the left-hand side of the curve is because we have fewer gates. And at the high side of the curve, the right-hand side of the curve, the red line is generally above the blue, and that's because we have a slightly warmer climate. Now, if you average all of these simulations together, all the daily values from May through September, when you look at the with climate runs versus without climate runs, we actually have a net decrease in temperature of about 1/2 of a degree Fahrenheit. And that's primarily related to the gates and not the climate itself. The climate has much smaller influence on release water temperature than the change in the gate structure. Okay, next slide, please. I want to explain in just a little more detail reasons we can't meet the temperature target when we're forced to release lower water. So if we look at the picture on the right, the blue line is a trace of the water surface elevations. This is an example year. It happens to be 2001 from March until the end of the year, March till December. The water level peaks in April at about 480 feet and then drops down to about 450 feet in November. The red lines are the locations of intake gates with the new 7-gate structure, and they're at 470, 450, 430, and 410 feet elevation. There's a couple more below, but we're just focusing on this range right now. The green line is the release water surface temperature. So if we follow along, the green line is rising, and I should say the temperature is on the right-hand axis where the other two are on the left-hand axis. So following along the green line on the right-hand axis, the release water warms up to about 65 degrees in the spring, and then we're able to hold 65 degrees until roughly August, when the water level drops below 450 feet. And instead of being able to pull water at 450 feet, we immediately have to switch and start pulling water at 430 feet because the gate at 450 is dry. Now the water temperature at 430 feet is much colder, and we see that drop in the green line from roughly 65 down to about 57 degrees instantaneously in the model. And that's the reason why those curves that we previously saw have a portion of the frequency that's below 65. It's events like this. We see another one of these happen in September. We're able to meet 65 through the end of August, climbing out of that hole in the beginning of August that we dropped. And then once again, when the water level drops through 430, we immediately have to start pulling at 410. And the water is much colder there. So we see a drop from 65 immediately down to closer to 52 degrees. So this is just a measure of the physics going on in the system, our ability to pull water at different levels, and the influence between the location of the thermocline, as I mentioned, and the location of those gates influencing release water temperature. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is just a summary table of month by month. The outlet temperature is done on a frequency basis. So if we look at September, for example, it says that 80% of the time we're able to deliver water on average that's above 64.5 degrees. The shaded cells are below 64.5 and the white cells are above 64.5. So the number of white cells in each column for each month give us a measure of how much of the time we can meet that 65-degree target. And again, if I didn't mention this previously, the growing season for rice is primarily May through September. When we ran the model initially, we set it up to release that target from April through November, just to provide a little buffer there. Okay, let's go to the next slide. It's kind of a summary of model results. So we're going to go through a couple of detailed pictures. Cognizant of time, I'm just going to focus on one or two of them. We're going to look at the frequency distributions, much like we did in that previous slide. And again, this is just for alternative 3. And these figures will match what's in the EIR, but with the addition of a line for the 2035 climate simulations. So the figures are provided for each month. You can see that in the testimony. But we're not gonna discuss every month because there's kind of patterns we want to look at. The curves don't always extend to 100%, and that indicates periods where we're not releasing. So see, in the month of July, for example, we're not releasing every day, so the curves won't. I should say January is a better example. We're not releasing every day in January, so the curves won't go all the way to span the full 100%. I mentioned that the releases do get somewhat warmer at the higher end of the range with the new climate. And these rises generally occur 5 to 10% of the time, and they're associated with low storage conditions. I mentioned that the elevation of the gates really influences the outlet temperature, and that in the EIR, we had a gate at 490 feet, and the latest design does not have that highest gate. So 20% of the time, the water surface elevation is actually above 490 feet. So in the previous runs, we were able to pull water near that elevation, but now the first gate is at 470 feet. So there's 20 feet, at least 20 feet of water, almost 30% of the time between where you want to pull and the surface. Again, the surface is going to be warm, the colder water is going to be deeper. So let's just look at a couple of these charts. The next slide, please. This will be for October. There are 2 charts. These are frequency curves. The one on the left is the surface water temperature, and the red lines are from the EIR, and the green lines are the revised runs showing future climate. So just focusing on the surface temperature, you can see that there's probably a 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit average increase with the future climate. And of course, this is going to affect the reservoir and the release temperature. Looking at the right side of the screen, this is the actual release water temperature. You can see it starts around 90% frequency exceedance. So 10% of the time, we're not releasing water in October. And it's very hard to meet the 65-degree target here, as we see in October, because most of the time the surface isn't even that warm. Okay, so let's go down to, we'll skip 4 or 5 slides. We'll go down to number 16, please. And this will be March. Thank you. Okay, so March, we're coming out of the winter conditions. The surface is still very cold, and we're only releasing water about 55% of the time. And there's no release target specified in March. So it's just releasing surface water effectively. That's why we're getting, actually, I should say it's specified as 50, but it's not a rice growing season. So we're releasing generally cold water through March. In April, we start to, next slide, please. We start to warm up into the spring, and you can see that reflected in both the surface temperature and the release water temperature as we warm up. If we could skip 2 more and go to July, number 20, please. Thank you. So now we're into the heat of the summer. We're able to meet the surface water target of 65 degrees. So that's represented by the flat portion of the curve on the right-hand image. Again, the red is the EIR runs, and the green is the future climate runs with fewer gates. So you can see at the right-hand side of the curve, we're actually warmer at the highest end because of the warmer climate. So the green is above the red at the highest values, and then on the left-hand side of the right-hand image, the green is below the red, and this is primarily because of the gate difference that I mentioned. So yes, the warmer climate does warm the reservoir a little more, but in terms of release water temperature, because of the gate structure spacing, the new runs with 7 gates show us not meeting the release target temperature as often. Okay, let's skip to 23. Most of the other monthly curves are just very similar versions of those ones we looked at, so I won't belabor those. Okay, just to provide a summary here, the CEQUAL model provides daily estimates of release water temperature for a full 82-year estimate of hydrologic and meteorologic variability, and this matches the CalSim and the USR DOM periods. The 2035 runs recently conducted kind of check the box of looking at future climate influence, whereas the EIR runs from 2023 did not account for future climate in the lake water quality modeling. The ability to meet the release temperature targets varies significantly through the rice growing season and year to year, but on average, between the months of June and September, the heart of the season, we're able to meet those targets between 55 and 80% of the time. The reservoir storage strongly influences the release water temperature. When the storage is low, the bottom waters are significantly warmer than average, and thus the release water reflects that warmer temperature. The future climate does warm the surface water significantly. It's 2 to 3 degrees warmer on average, and this does lead to an increase in average release water temperature when averaged over the year. But when we look at the growing season itself, there's actually a slight reduction with our future climate runs. And again, that future climate does include the gate structure, and I've mentioned more than once, it's really the gate structure that's responsible for this decrease. But the simulation average temperature that was in the EIR over the release period corresponding to the rice growing season of May to September is about 64.5 degrees. And we're within 1/2 of a degree with that in our future climate simulations that also take into account an upgraded design to that inlet outlet structure. So in conclusion here, that inlet outlet structure does strongly influence the ability to meet the temperature targets. With fewer gates, we reduce that frequency that we can meet any target, because with fewer gates, it leads to somewhat cooler temperature release on average, just based on the physical location, vertical location of those gates. Okay, that concludes my testimony summary.
Thank you.
Thank
Dr. Davids, you're next. Oh, excuse me.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is the core reporter. I could use a break. That was tough.
That sounds good.
Thank you.
We probably all could. It is 10:29. Let's go ahead and take a 11-minute break. We'll return at 10:40 and we'll pick up with Dr. Davids. Thank you. Welcome back. I'll look to our court reporter. Are you ready to go?
Yes, thank you for the break.
Oh, yes, no problem. Thank you for asking for it. And with that, I will turn things back over to you, Mr. Ferguson.
Dr. Davids, can you please state your name for the record?
Yes, Jeffrey Davids.
Is Exhibit Sites 112 an accurate statement of your written testimony?
Yes, it is.
And did you prepare that written testimony?
I did.
And do you have any corrections to your written testimony that you would like to make?
I do have one small correction to make on page 11, line 1. It references sites 314, and that should be replaced with AHO 314. So small typo. Again, sites 314 should be replaced with AHO 314 for the reference.
Okay, thank you. Is Exhibit Sites 261 an accurate summary presentation of your written testimony?
It is, yes.
And did you prepare that summary presentation?
I did.
And is Exhibit Sites 140 an accurate statement of your qualifications?
Yes, it is.
And do Exhibit Sites 141 through 153 submitted with your written testimony and cited therein include true and correct copies of documentation of the Calusa Subbasin revised GSP, your groundwater recharge analyses, groundwater seepage with sites reservoir operating, as documented in the EIR documentation?
Yes, they do.
Thank you. At this time, can you please summarize your written testimony using Sites Exhibit 261?
I'd be happy to do so. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. Well, good morning, Hearing Officer Kinsey, members of the board and public. My name is Jeff Davids. I'm a water resources engineer with Davids Engineering, and I'm going to present testimony on my analysis of sites reservoir impacts on Calusa Subbasin groundwater conditions. I should make one disclaimer that I'm battling an untimely cold, and while I'll do my best to mute myself if coughing comes up out of nowhere, but I apologize in advance if I fail to be perfectly successful at that attempt. Next slide, please, Ms. Mullen. Okay, so to start with, I'd like to develop a common spatial understanding of where the Calusa Subbasin lies in reference to the key sites project elements. So here we have the Calusa Subbasin boundaries shown in green, spanning over portions of both Glenn County in the north and Calusa County in the south, bounded by the Stony Creek on the north, the Yolo County line on the south, and generally the Sacramento River on the east, and the coastal range on the west. The Calusa Subbasin includes nearly 724,000 acres. Now, there's a few additional points I'd like to make here about the Calusa Subbasin. First is that the Calusa Subbasin is managed by the Calusa Groundwater Authority and the Glenn Groundwater Authority, which are both groundwater sustainability agencies in charge of collectively managing the subbasin. Second, Davids Engineering has been involved in water management in the Calusa Subbasin for nearly 2 decades, and specifically sustainable groundwater management planning and support for nearly a decade. And that includes, together with the Glenn Groundwater Authority and the Calusa Groundwater Authority, the development of the initial GSP or Groundwater Sustainability Plan and the revised Groundwater Sustainability Plan recently submitted to DWR in April of this year. We can also see the site's reservoir inundated area shown in light blue or cyan in reference to the Calusa Subbasin on this figure, roughly in the middle, north to south, and off to the west side of the Calusa Subbasin. And then the key project elements of the Glen Calusa Irrigation District main canal providing water to the site's reservoir, in addition to the Tehama-Calusa Canal providing water to the site's reservoir, both shown in light blue. Next slide, please, Ms. Mullen. Now, this is similar content here, but just taking a different perspective. So this is looking off to the northeast now, a little bit closer into the site's reservoir, and I'd like to highlight a few other elements with this slide. Namely, the inundated area is shown of the site's reservoir is shown in the light blue or cyan color on the left side of the graphic. And extending beyond that, farther to the west, are the watersheds for the two local creeks that will be impounded by the site's reservoir. On the north side, that's the Funks Creek watershed expanding to the north and west of the site's inundated area, and the Stone Corral Creek on the south portion of that. Together, those represent approximately 55,000 acres of watershed. Next slide, please. Now, in thinking about the potential impacts of the site's reservoir on Colusa subbasin groundwater conditions, I identified 7 different distinct impacts. And those are summarized graphically on the right with some sort of spatial awareness and enumerated on the left, 1 through 7. The green arrows represent increases in recharge to the Colusa subbasin, and the orange arrows and numbers represent decreases in recharge to the Colusa subbasin. Now, while all 7 of these impacts that I evaluated are potential in the sense that the sites project, of course, is not a certainty, I have chosen to selectively use the word potential in the description of 3 of these 7 that are highly dependent on future operational or management decisions. We'll talk more about that in subsequent slides. In these cases, I also chose to quantitatively present the potential impacts as ranges of numbers to further articulate this uncertainty and dependence on future operational and management decisions. Next slide, please. Now, on this slide, I've summarized the quantitative nature of my testimony for each of these 7 potential impacts to the Colusa subbasin, and then provided summations of 2 different scenarios, or rather ranges of scenarios, at the bottom of the enumerated list on the left-hand side. Now, subsequent slides will go through each of these 7 impacts in greater detail, providing the background and support for how I estimated these quantities. But for now, I'd like to point out that the range of potential impacts spans from a reduction in recharge of 2,400 acre-feet per year, all the way up to an increase in recharge of 25,000 acre-feet per year. Now, relative to total recharge in the subbasin, estimated in both the initial and revised groundwater sustainability plans, that represents a decrease in recharge of approximately 0.6%, ranging all the way up to a potential increase of recharge of 6.0%. Again, positive values moving forward will represent an increase in recharge, and negative values will represent a decrease in recharge. And furthermore, impacts that present a range of values, again, represent those potential impacts that are highly dependent on future operational or management decisions. Next slide, please. So for each of the 7 impacts, I'm going to highlight the particular feature that relates to this impact in the map figure that falls to the side and slightly behind the transparent text on these graphs. And in this case, I'm going to start with a discussion of the Glen Colusa Irrigation District canal shown in red in the map figure on the right. And the specific question that this impact is related to is, how does Sites Reservoir increase recharge from the Glen Colusa Irrigation District main canal due to increased wintertime flows? So essentially, we need to know 2 things to quantify this potential impact. One is how much more frequently will the Glen Colusa Irrigation District canal operate than it would have under the no project alternative if Sites is constructed? That's part 1. Part 2 is when it does operate, what is the anticipated seepage rate from that canal operating? Now, you might ask, why are we not also looking at the Tehama-Colusa Canal? The reason for that is that the Tehama-Colusa Canal is actually concrete lined all the way from its head up near Red Bluff, all the way down to the ending down near Dunnigan. So in this case, I based my testimony on the work from the EIR and EIS included as AHO 69, where it estimates that the Glen Colusa Irrigation District Canal will operate an additional 4 weeks relative to the no project alternative. I based my testimony for seepage rate on a GCID resource plan water balance element report that David's Engineering prepared, included as sites 144. And coming up or combining these two sources of information, the estimated increase in recharge to the Colusa subbasin as the water moves from Hamilton City down to west of Maxwell is an estimated 5,150 acre-feet per year increase in recharge. Next slide, please. Now, the second impact relates to the question, how does Sites Reservoir itself, shown in red on the left side of this figure, increase recharge directly from this inundated area of 13,200 acres at its full capacity? Now, in this case, I estimated the recharge and based my testimony on the revised EIR included in sites as an exhibit sites 146 and used the alternative A formulation. Now, the reason I used the alternative A formulation at that time is because there were two reservoir sizes included in the revised EIS. One was 1.3 million acre-feet and one was 1.8 million acre-feet. And it's conservative in this case to use the smaller footprint so that we have a conservatively low estimate of the increase in recharge. Now, in the EIR, they represented seepage from the full inundated area as 1,500 gallons per minute. Of course, that would persist throughout the entire year. So if you work out the math, this relates to 2,400 acre-feet per year increase in recharge to the Colusa subbasin. Next slide, please. Now, the third impact and the final increase in recharge that I looked at was how does Sites Reservoir potentially increase recharge from projects utilizing Sites project waters? And so here you can see that I've still kept the Sites Reservoir as the element in question red in the background. But here the question is, how might additional water from sites, whether it be local water from the site, Stone Corral Creek and Funks Creek, or whether it be diverted and impounded Sacramento River water, how might that increase the ability of locals within the Colusa subbasin to increase both indirect or in lieu, rather, sorry, let me correct that, either direct or in lieu recharge of those waters? So in this case, I based my testimony on Chapter 5 of the final EIR included as AHO 72. And in that, there's an estimate from CalSim II modeling that estimates the deliveries on average to storage partners within the Colusa subbasin as 18,000 acre-feet per year. Now, the water availability analysis included as AHO 39 also estimates an available 2,900 acre-feet per year of local supplies from these two watersheds, the Funks and Stone Corral Creeks. So adding those two together, this provides a potential benefit or a potential increase in direct or in lieu recharge to the Colusa subbasin of 21,000 acre-feet per year. Now, again, this is one of the potential impacts because whether or not this 21,000 acre-feet of recharge is realized is dependent on future management and operational decisions about what these storage partners ultimately do with these volumes of water. That's why it's presented from 0 to 21,000 acre-feet per year. Next slide, please, Ms. Mullen. So now we're going to shift gears into the four impacts that are reductions to recharge due to Sites Reservoir operations. And the first question being, how does the construction of the terminal regulating reservoir decrease recharge? So we've heard from previous speakers that the Glen Colusa Irrigation District is one of the two conveyance facilities bringing water to the Sites Reservoir. And there's a reservoir that is contemplated called the Terminal Regulating Reservoir, where water will be delivered from GCID Canal and then pumped up into the Sites Reservoir. Now, in the design included in AHO 69, this reservoir is contemplated to be lined such that precipitation can no longer enter through the soil surface and recharge the underlying groundwater system. So in this case, there's a reduction in recharge because of the construction. Now, the footprint of this reservoir is 100 acres. And so what that means is that from the GSP, we estimate recharge from precipitation to be approximately 0.22 feet per year. And because we have a 100-acre footprint, this translates into a reduction of recharge of approximately 20 acre-feet per year. Next slide, please. Now, for the fifth impact, the question here is how do diversions from the Sacramento River into the Tehama-Coosa Canal and the Glen-Coosa Irrigation District main canal for Sites Reservoir decrease recharge from the Sacramento River? So I think we all have an intuition that if you divert water off of a waterway, it's going to lower the water in that waterway by some extent. Now, of course, the diversions are occurring at high flows, so the percent change in water level may be small, but nevertheless, there will be some reduction in water level. And the question is, with that reduction in water level, how might recharge from the Sacramento River as it traverses the eastern boundary of the Coosa subbasin change? And so to answer this question, I based my testimony on modeling results from CalSim II, coupled with additional modeling results from the Central Valley Hydrologic Model. That's a USGS mod flow model. And this question was posed within the EIR and EIS. And specifically, they looked at impacts to the Sacramento River at 5, 10, and 12 miles downstream of each of these diversion points, and at a period of time from 0 to 42 years. Now, if you look at that period of record, the reductions in recharge never reduce more than 1 CFS for the Tehama-Coosa Canal or 2 CFS for the Glen-Coosa Irrigation District main canal. Now, being conservative here, I took those maximum values that were ever observed during that period, the modeling period of 42 years, summed those together to get 3 CFS total impact to recharge, and then assumed that those were persistent through the entire diversion period. Now, again, this is highly conservative because diversions are not likely to occur for all 287 days from September 1st through June 14th, but assuming that in a conservative manner yields a reduction in recharge from the Sacramento River of approximately 1,700 acre-feet per year. Next slide, please. Now, the sixth impact I analyzed was referring to the question, how do potential changes in runoff from Funks and Stone Corral Creeks potentially decrease recharge? Now, I based my testimony in this case on actual measurements that I performed out in the field in the spring of 2024 in April, May, and June. Now, from these flow measurements, I was able to empirically solve for a seepage rate. In other words, how easily do the soils underlying these channels, Funks Creek and Stone Corral Creek, transmit water from the surface to the subsurface. And from that estimated seepage rate, I was able to combine that with an understanding of the spatial extent that water is available to seep through those stream beds, and also the timing that water is available by which the water can seep through these stream beds. And the culmination of that work yielded a range of potential reductions in recharge from 0 to negative 1,040 acre-feet per year. Now, again, this is presented as a range because of uncertainty in future management and operational decisions. If the releases into these 2 creeks mimic historical hydrology in that they keep the creeks as wet, as often, in the same spatial extent as historically was the case, the impact would be 0 in terms of the reduction in recharge. However, my estimate is if you completely were to dry these streams up, the impact on recharge would be the negative 1,040 acre-feet per year. So that's why it's presented as a range. Next slide, please, Ms. Mullen. Now, what this figure shows is the 6 measurement locations, 3 on each of the Funks and Stone Corral Creeks that I performed stream flow measurements this spring to help provide the support for this testimony here. 3 are from the Funks Creek watershed, from the Funks Reservoir, the midpoint down towards the Glen-Coosa Irrigation District Canal, and then the Glen-Coosa Irrigation District Canal slightly upstream. On Stone Corral, the first measurement point is all the way up near the proposed dam site, and the next measurement point is near the Tehama-Coosa Canal siphon, and the final measurement point is just upstream of the Glen-Coosa Irrigation District main canal. Now, I want to pause here and point out that for good portions of the year, namely from about March through December, the lower portions of Funks and Stone Corral creeks are wet, not because of runoff from the Funks and Stone Corral Creeks watersheds themselves, but because Glen Clusa Irrigation District uses those facilities for the conveyance of their water. And so oftentimes you'll see 70 CFS, for example, in these watersheds when the creeks themselves upstream are actually dry. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is just a picture showing the Stone Corral Creek in this case. This is the upstream site. On the left-hand side is a photo of the actual measurement location. You can see the tagline stretched across the channel, which provides the stationing for performing what's called a USGS midsection measurement of flow rate through this channel. And on the right side, we see a screenshot from the Sontec acoustic Doppler velocimeter. It's just a fancy instrument to measure water velocity. And in this case, the flow rate, and this was from May 22nd of this year, was 0.34 CFS. So about a third of a CFS was coming from the Stone Corral watershed in May. If you rewind back to April, the flow rate was approximately 2.9 CFS, approximately 10 times that, but still about 3 CFS. Next slide, please. Now, the seventh and final impact that I analyzed relates to the question of how do potential changes in runoff from Funks and Stone Corral creeks potentially decrease recharge from projects that contemplated the use of these waters in the groundwater sustainability plan. So this is a little bit of this is probably the most complicated impact to understand and articulate. In the GSP, in the groundwater sustainability plan, there was a potential project that was contemplated which utilized west side tributary waters for the purpose of direct or in lieu recharge. Now, these projects included as projects or management actions in the groundwater sustainability plan have not been realized. At the time, they were highly speculative. They still require state board permitting and environmental permitting, and of course, a plan to finance what they contemplated. But nevertheless, to be conservative, I assumed that the full scope of this potential plan could potentially be impacted by Sites Reservoir and changes in runoff to the downstream watersheds. In this case, the GSP represented the potential scope for all 7 of these watersheds on the west side. Of course, we're interested in only 2 watersheds, and if you scale the full scope of potential recharge activities of 15,900 acre-feet down to just Stone Corral and Funks Creek watersheds, this yields 5,300 acre-feet per year of potential scope referenced in the groundwater sustainability planning process. Again, this is presented as a range because we're not sure if these projects ever would have happened or not, but the maximum impact I estimate to be 5,300 acre-feet per year. Next and final slide, please. So this just shows the 7 watersheds that I've been speaking about for this west side tributary project contemplated in the GSP. We can see the Funks Creek watershed in sort of a cyan color and kind of a darker green for the Stone Corral Creek watershed. And again, prorating the potential scope of benefits for direct and in the recharge by about 1/3 yields that 5,300 acre-foot per year estimate. I think I misspoke because this is the next and final slide here. And we've already seen this slide. Ms. Molly, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. We've already seen this slide again, but what it does is it presents these 7 impacts. Again, green being increases, orange being decreases, and presents them as a range. Now, the way that those sums at the bottom are provided or computed is basically if you take the lowest value and add those up, so the most negative value and the lowest value in terms of the positive values, you get negative 2,400 acre-feet per year. If you take the most positive value or highest value, you end up with 25,000 acre-feet per year. You might see this as sort of the best and worst case scenarios to the Clusa subbasin, the worst being the negative 2,400 and the best being the 25,000 acre-feet per year. This concludes the oral summary of my testimony.
Thank you very much. All right, we are finished with panel 3's direct testimony.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Davids. Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. I believe with that, we will gear up for cross-examination of the panel. And first I will look to, first I'm going to change my view so I can see the room. And then I will look to DWR, reclamation, or state water contractors. Do you have any questions for this panel?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm
This is
Avery.
just-
I'm sorry. Who said that? Who said I do not?
Sorry, this is Eric Soderlin for the Department of Water Resources.
Thank you.
This is Amy Oftenberg for Reclamation. No questions.
Thank you.
This is Jenna Mandel-Rice for the State Water Contractors, and I just have one question.
Wonderful. Please go ahead.
Could be answered, I think, either by Mr. Miko or Mr. Whittington. It relates to the CalSim modeling results. And in the discussion of those modeling results, you indicated that there would be an increase, or there was an increase shown in State Water Project and Central Valley Project diversions. Would it be correct to say that the increase in diversions that's shown by the modeling results are the result of previously stored sites water that is moving through the water transfer window?
Are you referring to my presentation that included the delta exports through CVP and SWP facilities? Right.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. To clarify on that result, that's primarily attributed to sites water that's being conveyed through those facilities for site storage projects for refuge level 4 delivery. There are some what we call incidental effects from sites, the modeling of sites project that causes minor effects to CVP, SWP deliveries outside of the site's members, but those are quite small, and it's just on the scale of just like a couple thousand acre feet on a long-term basis. So the vast majority of that 90 to 100,000 acre feet of increased export is attributed to conveyance of sites water.
And you would agree that sites water is not State Water Project water?
Yes.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. With that, I will look again to my gallery view and ask the coordinating NGO parties. Which of you would like to ask questions first?
This is John Mooney. Okay, or did you want to go first, Chris?
No, please.
Okay.
Mr. Mooney.
So I have some questions, and I'll start with, if we could get on the screen on AHO 259, page 6. And scroll down to what the paragraph in prior comments. Yeah, perfect. So I have a question. I think I'll ask it of each of a number of the witnesses, but Mr. Miko, you worked on the CalSim model with respect to alternative 3. Is that correct?
I did.
Okay. And here is a comment letter that was dated January 28th, 2022. It's a State Water Resources Control Board comment letter on the draft revised draft environmental impact report for the sites project. Do you recall ever seeing the State Water Board's comment letter with regards to the draft EIR?
I cannot recall specifically.
Okay. I'm going to read a part of it that's up on the screen where it says, specifically, the State Water Board has commented that operating criteria should be evaluated that are consistent with possible updates to the Bay Delta Plan, which are reasonably foreseeable as identified in the State Water Board's 2017 Scientific Basis Report in support of potential update and implementation of the Bay Delta Plan, and the State Water Board's 2018 Framework for Possible Updates to the Bay Delta Plan. Did you do any modeling that addressed the possible updates to the Bay Delta Plan in the operating criteria?
Not that I can recall.
Okay.
Chad, feel
Were
free
you ever?
if you'd like.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I was also providing Mr. Whittington an opportunity to add if you'd like to.
Yeah, Mr. Whittington?
No, I don't recall or have anything to add either.
Okay. Were you ever asked to provide any such modeling?
I don't recall being asked to provide such modeling.
Mr. Whittington?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And then it goes on to say specifically bypass flow criteria to be evaluated that are consistent with achieving inflows and outflows of 55% of unimpaired flow with a range of 45 to 65%. That's kind of the same question. Did you ever do any modeling that took into that operational criteria, Mr. Miko? Is it Miko?
It's Miko, yeah.
Okay.
For everyone to know for later on. Yes, I do not recall.
Okay, and same with you, Mr. Whittington.
Yeah, I don't recall this either.
Okay, and is it safe to say you were never asked? Again, you were never asked to do that type of modeling with that operational criteria.
Sorry, now I was the one cutting you off. I don't recall being asked to do that type of model.
Okay. Had you been asked to do it, you would have done that though. Is that correct?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained. I think that's in any case, sustained.
Okay, that's fine. And then with respect to the operation, the modeling that you did that take into consideration the 2019 biological opinion? Well, first, are you aware of the 2019 biological opinions for the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project?
I'm aware of that, yes.
Okay. And did the modeling that you did in the CalSim, did that take into consideration those two biological opinions?
Yes.
And I think your testimony made reference to the federal litigation with respect to those biological opinions. Is that correct?
I don't believe my testimony spoke to federal litigation regarding this biological opinions.
Mr. Whittington, did your testimony? Okay.
No, it did not.
Okay. Are you aware that there's federal litigation with respect to those two biological opinions?
Generally, yes.
Okay. Mr. Whittington?
Generally, yes.
Okay. And are you aware that about 2 years ago, I think it was, I don't have the exact date in front of me, that the federal agencies indicated that they were going to reinitiate consultation? Are you aware of that?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I am as well.
Okay. And are you aware that in 2022 and in 2023, there were interim operations plans by court order modifying those 2019 biological opinions?
Generally, yes.
Mr. Whittington?
Generally, yes.
And did you do any modeling that would be, did you adjust your modeling at all to address the interim operations plans?
I do not recall adjusting modeling to reflect interim operations plans.
Mr. Whittington?
No, I don't believe that was done for the final or EIS.
And so, Mr. Miko, right?
Yes, Miko.
I apologize.
It's okay. It's very common.
On your in your testimony, you indicated that the modeling you did was essentially the no action alternative and then alternative 3 in the EIR. Is that correct?
I selected those 2 alternatives to present in my testimony. That is correct.
Okay. And were you asked by somebody to rely on alternative 3? Or directed?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Jumped ahead. I selected alternative 3 because I'm aware that that was the approved alternative from the EIR.
And are you aware that alternative 3 provides for a 25% contribution and participation by the Bureau of Reclamation?
I am aware of that, yes.
Okay. And are you aware that alternative 1 provided for, I believe it was a 7% reclamation participation?
I'm aware that there were 2 sub-alternatives for alternative 1, one of which has no reclamation participation. That's alternative 1A. And then alternative 1B has a 7%, I believe, reclamation participation.
Okay. Are you and so so your modeling took into account on alternative 3 reclamation's participation of being 25%, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Are you aware that reclamation's current participation is 9%?
Generally, yes.
Okay. Did you do any modeling on or submit any modeling with respect to this hearing process that would reflect a 9% participation of reclamation?
I cannot recall submitting any modeling for this hearing process that reflects a 9% investment.
Okay. And kind of the same question to you, Mr. Whittington.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any that include the 9% investment.
Okay. Let me ask this. Have you done modeling with respect to alternative, which would really be, I'll say, a reclamation participation of in the range of 9 to 9%?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
You said you hadn't submitted. I think when I asked you, you said you hadn't submitted it here for the purposes of this hearing. My question is have you done any the modeling that would reflect essentially alternative 1, or I wouldn't even say alternative 1, I'll just say based upon a reclamation participation of 9%?
I don't recall completing any modeling that represents reclamation at 9%. We'll see if Mr. Whittington has anything to add on to that.
No, I don't remember seeing that model
Okay.
by anyone.
And I'll represent to you that on Tuesday, I believe it was, Mr. Brown had testified that reclamation's participation may go up as high as 16%. So I'm going to ask you essentially the same question. Have you done any modeling that would reflect reclamation's participation at 16%?
Yes, there has been modeling that has been conducted that reflects reclamation participation of 16%.
Okay, Mr. Whittington?
I did not recall that one, but I defer to Steve.
Okay. Thank you. And that modeling that was done for 16%, has that been submitted to the State Water Resources Control Board as part of this hearing process?
I believe it has.
And that's in your testimony?
No, it is not in my testimony.
Okay. Do you know what exhibit number that might be?
I can't recall specifically. I believe, and I don't know if it's appropriate, but I could ask for, well, I'll just say I believe it is part of Dr. Greenwood's testimony.
Okay, that's coming up later.
Correct.
Okay. But none of your testimony today relied upon that modeling, is that correct? The modeling of the 16%.
None of the testimony I presented today relied on the model of 16%.
Mr. Winslow, or Dr. Winslow, on page 5 of your testimony, you stated that that you also relied upon alternative 3 for your analysis. And in that, was that based upon a 25% reclamation participation?
It was.
Okay. And are you aware that reclamation's participation is currently at 9%?
I was not.
Okay. Are you aware that reclamation's participation, or that Mr. Brown testified, may go up as high as 16%?
I was not.
Okay. So your analysis was all based upon a reclamation participation of 25%, correct?
My testimony was focused on alternative 3. The EIR analysis presented multiple alternatives as outlined by Mr. Miko.
I'm sorry, by Mr.
By Mr. Miko, the alternative 1A, 1B, and alternative 3 were all studied with the lake water quality model. We testified today on alternative 3 because that's the preferred or approved alternative from the EIR.
Okay, I understand that, but in relying on alternative 3, you assumed a reclamation participation of 25%, correct?
Yes, it's alternative 3 as defined as of June 2022.
Okay.
Which, yeah, includes the 25%.
And in your analysis, were you ever asked to provide testimony on a reclamation participation of less than 25%?
I was not.
And were you ever asked to do an analysis based on that would reflect the proposed revisions, which we discussed here earlier about the updates to the Bay Delta plan?
I was not.
Okay. And did you ever do any such analysis with respect to your analysis with regards to possible updates to the Bay Delta plan? That would include the possible updates?
No, I didn't.
Okay. And Dr. Davids, I'd ask you the same questions with regards to your testimony. On page 11, you said you relied on estimated average annual deliveries to storage partners north of the delta of 21,000 acre feet in the alternative 3 scenario presented in the final EIR as the basis for estimating the upper range of potential recharge that could occur in the subbasin from Sacramento River water stored in Sites Reservoir. So your analysis was based upon alternative 3, is that correct?
That is correct.
And did that assume a reclamation participation at 25%?
So I will defer that question back to the CalSim modelers, who have previously testified on that, but I'm basically using the CalSim outputs for the input of my analysis.
Okay. So if their analysis relied upon 25% reclamation participation, full 25%, then your analysis reflected that. Is that correct?
My analysis incorporates exactly what their outputs would be, correct?
And Ms. Sadat, on your testimony, you also relied upon alternative 3. Is that correct?
The results I presented today and in my testimony, yes, they are alternative 3 results.
Okay. And in doing your the water quality analysis, you relied upon a reclamation contribution at 25%. Is that correct?
I used CalSim outputs as an input in the models I presented today, and these assumptions are implemented in CalSim. So yes, as it was testified by Mr. Miko and Whittington, so it's the 25% reclamation investments in alternative 3.
And so those and did you just use the CalSim model predictions that were produced by Mr. Whittington and Mr. Miko? I will never get that right.
For the DSM-2 model, yes.
Okay.
For the temperature, site release temperature blending tool,
I'm sorry.
I also used
Sorry.
Dr. Sadat, you were cutting out there for a moment. It looks like you have unfrozen, so maybe we can try again. I'll turn to the court reporter. At what point were you not able to hear?
All I got was for the CalSim model, and then I started interrupting. Sorry.
Thank you. I think maybe if you can start your answer to the question again, Ms. Sadat, then we'll have a more clear record. I apologize.
Sure. Hopefully it's better now. For the CalSim, so for DSM-2, yes, I use CalSim outputs. For the sites release temperature blending model, I use both HIC5Q outputs and then the C=W2 model.
And all of those relied upon, and all of those had the assumption of alternative 3.
Yes.
And the full reclamation 25%.
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. any of the witnesses on the panel, I'll just ask this generally, ever meet with State Water Board staff with regards to the modeling?
If this is a question to everybody, the answer is no from my side.
Okay, yeah, it's a question to everybody.
No from my side, Mr. Winslow.
Excuse me. Dr. Winslow, when you speak, can you speak up just a little? I'm having some trouble hearing you. I don't know if the court reporter is, but I sure am. Thank you.
This is Mr. Miko. I may have, I do not recall specifically.
This is Whittington, and I don't recall.
Okay.
I don't recall either.
Okay. Okay, I think that's all. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. Mr. Schutz, I see you're off mute. Are you the next nominee, if you will?
I am. Thank you very much.
Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My questions are almost exclusively for Mr. Whittington regarding the CalSim modeling. Good morning, Mr. Whittington.
Morning.
You describe on page 11 of your testimony at lines 12 through 16 the outline of how an exchange between Sites Reservoir and Shasta Reservoir in dry and critical years would work in the modeling. I'd like to ask you some questions so you can walk us through how you set up the modeling for those exchanges. And I'm going to suggest different steps, and if I'm incorrect, I'm going to ask you if that's correct, and if it's not, I'd invite you to state it more accurately in your own terms. So, as I understand it, you first run the CalSim model without any exchange between sites and Shasta. Is that correct?
I don't believe so. The model is run with the inclusion of the exchange operations, and it's not an iterative process, if that's what you're meaning by that question.
So how then, when you look, for example, at so the no action alternative, however, would not have exchanges with sites. Is that correct?
That's correct. No action does not include sites project.
And so your alternative 3 alternative is includes exchanges with Sites Reservoir, correct?
Correct.
And when you're preparing your exceedance plots, such as those you presented in your testimony this morning, or in your exhibit 244, for example, on slide 16, where you show Shasta September storage, the 2 lines represent the no action alternative and the alternative 3, which includes the Shasta exchange. Is that correct?
Excuse me, Ms. Kinsey. Can I request that we bring the exhibit up?
Sure.
And talk about specific details within the plot.
Yes. Do you have an exhibit number, Mr. Schutz?
Exhibit 244.
Slide 16.
That was exhibit 244, slide 16.
Sites 244. And while we're waiting for that, Mr. Whittington, Sites 244 is an exhibit you provided with your written testimony to provide the figures and examples of what you were talking about. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. So the difference we're looking at here, in part, I mean, there may be other differences, but it's between the no action alternative that doesn't have sites Shasta exchanges, and the alternative 3, which does have them. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So can we go to slide 4, please, of this same exhibit? So this provides the a summary of the criteria that you used to perform the Shasta exchange modeling. Is that correct?
Yes. And this table primarily represents the assumptions for the temperature management operation of the Shasta exchange.
Thank you. And so we see here that the temperature management operations would occur in dry or critical years. Is that correct? Sort of in the middle, the second one down, and then occur primarily, the exchange period you identify is April through June, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the release constraints and what those figures in the middle mean, where it says August, September, October, and November, please?
Yes. Those constraints are on Shasta releases. Well, I'll just pause there. Did you have any specific question pertaining to this?
Sure. So you show the preferred, what you call the preferred flow. When you did your modeling, did you model to achieve those flows in those months? Or was that always done? Was it a target? Can you tell us a little bit more why you have those numbers in there, please?
Yeah, as stated in the table, they're not explicitly modeled. And from my understanding, I believe that results were evaluated after the model was run to determine what the flow values were and how they corresponded to the assumptions that were being implemented in the model. And so based on and through development of the CalSim model for the site's operations, the logic was over time refined to achieve the preferred flows that are in that row as often as possible.
As often as possible.
And that is my understanding.
Were you not the person who did this?
I was not the person that coded in this particular aspect of the model. Yeah, there's a team of modelers that work on CalSim. That's part of well, it's a complex and big model, so there's a lot of collaborators on this project.
I see. And Mr. Miko was not the person who did this either. Is that correct?
I do not recall.
Mr. Miko, do you recall?
I did not put the code in for this particular operation.
Okay. Well, I'm going to continue the Mr. Whittington there and ask questions to the extent of his knowledge. I'm trying to understand in not code terms, we don't need that, but in terms of the broad outline of what was done in order to model this exchange, how this works. So am I correct in thinking that in order to model the exchange, to begin with, a certain amount of water was released from Sites Reservoir, and let's just for example, say that was 100,000 acre feet, so we can have a number to work with. Am I correct in thinking that to begin this operation, a defined volume of water over the April through June period was released from sites as the first part of the exchange?
Yes, well, I'm not sure if I would say that it's necessarily the first part of the exchange or where in the order it is, but sites water may be released in that April through June period. In exchange, water would be saved in Shasta, and that's tracked in the model. The volume associated with what is being released from sites corresponds to the volume that is tracked to be saved within the Shasta Reservoir.
I see. And then sometime later in the year, in the July through November time period, that water that was tracked in the model is released by the model to sites project partners. Is that correct?
Yes, it may be released to sites participants.
Could I add one there? Oh, sorry to interrupt, Mr. Schutz. Would it be appropriate if I added a clarifying note there?
Please do.
Okay. As mentioned in the table, that water would be released in the August through November timeframe. The way I heard the question was whether or not that water would be released in the July through November timeframe.
Thank you for the correction. I appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. That's what it says.
Right.
And so in the in the model output, by the time you get to the end of November, as you're describing it, all of the water that was stored in sites as part of the exchange, stored in Shasta as part of the exchange, would be released by the model by the end of November. Is that correct?
Not necessarily.
Okay, and you can explain why not?
Some water may remain in the reservoir that was not released in the August through November period.
And what would happen to that water in a longer term time period?
Projection, speculation.
No, I'm asking how it's modeled. I'm not asking him to speculate. I'm asking him what the model did.
And with respect
Okay,
to the
then form of question. Yeah, please.
Would you please describe what the model does with any remaining water that's not released in the August through June through November time period? Any of the water that was stored in Shasta as part of the exchange?
Well, so by the end of the CVP contract year in February, the excess volume that was preserved in Shasta is subject to being spilled.
I see. Okay. Can we go back to slide, I believe it was 16? So this is the end of September Shasta storage, correct?
Yes.
And what we're seeing again is the dotted line is the alternative 3 and the solid line is the no action alternative.
Yes.
And part of the dotted line accounts for potential exchanges between Shasta and between sites and Shasta. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I believe you mentioned in your in your summary that there was another potential operational measure that reclamation could take that would affect storage in Shasta. Can you refresh our memory as to what you called that and what that would be?
Yeah, we refer to that as CVP operational flexibility. And
sorry.
Yeah, sorry. That would correspond to that's where we have in the model we have different sub accounts attributed to whoever is invested in the water. And so in this case, Sites Reservoir would be modeled to have a sub account for reclamation. And in alternative 3, that's the 25%.
And so within the confines of that sub account, what are the different measures or operations that would be encompassed in that sub account?
So it is still used for well, it's reclamation's discretion. In the model, it's the primary goal is to use the water in terms of temperature management. So similar to the exchange, which the Shasta exchange, the water is used so that sites would make releases that could then be saved up in Shasta, preserving the cold water pool, and then be used to meet temperature management objectives such as spring pulses or stabilizing fall flows. And well, yeah, that's my summary, but let me know if you have any other questions, of course.
Sure. So looking at this is end of September Shasta storage and a comparison of the two alternatives. But not all of the water stored as a credit to project partners in sites would be released by the end of September under the constraints you identified in slide 4. Is that correct?
Objection, vague.
Would some of the water that is part of an exchange between sites and Shasta be released to project partners in October and November?
Yes, it could.
So the end of September storage plot doesn't necessarily show how much water is carried over into the following year as a difference between the no action alternative and alternative 3. And if that's not clear, I can clarify. Is that correct?
It shows the carryover from one water year to the next water year.
But by the time you get to November or December, some of the water that you're saying is carried over may have been released as part of the exchange. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you're talking about potential carryover. Can we go back to slide 4, please? Thank you. Now it says that the exchanges are designed to take place in dry and critically dry years. How likely is it? Not fairly likely, let me put it that way. Is it not likely that water exchanged in these dry and critically dry years would be called for by project partners if indeed it was there to be had, would be called for in October and November?
Objection, vague, ambiguous, compound. as the likely?
Mr. Schutz, if you would try your question again, and
I will try it again. I'm
I think
trying
your
to put it
point,
together.
I understand. I know this is hard to articulate, so I
Yes.
appreciate your effort.
I mean, there are multiple things going on here. We're talking, this exchange is designed to take place in dry and critically dry years, correct?
The Shasta exchange, which is
Correct.
separate from the CVP operational flexibility.
Understood. So to the degree that we're talking about a Shasta exchange, wouldn't it be likely that water from project partners other than reclamation that was exchanged with Shasta would be called for in October, by the end of November, by those project partners?
It is a possibility, yes.
Okay. Now, when we're looking at the comparison between the two alternatives, it is difficult to understand with the Shasta flexibility component, sort of what's a function of the exchange and what's a function of that reclamation's flexibility. But at least as far as the exchange is concerned, is there an assumption that reclamation's operation of Shasta Reservoir would be subject to what reclamation decided, how it decided to operate the reservoir? It has discretion, does it not, to operate the reservoir in different ways? And the model is making assumptions about how reclamation is going to respond to the availability of water from sites. Is that correct?
Objection. Compound.
It's fair, Mr. Schutz.
Call for a legal conclusion.
Well, let's start with breaking it down. Let's go in shorter chunks here.
Sure. When you're modeling exchanges and water provided to reclamation under reclamation's flexibility, you're making assumptions about how reclamation is going to use the water, correct?
Yes.
And those assumptions are subject to decisions made by reclamation independent of sites, correct?
Well, it's dependent on how much water is saved in their storage account.
But generally speaking, reclamation has control over how it operates Shasta Reservoir, correct?
Objection. Calls for legal conclusion.
Well, let me try the question this way. Well, and I don't know if this, I actually don't know the answer to this. Mr. Whittington, is it your understanding that the authority would not control the release of reclamation water from Shasta Reservoir?
Yes, that is my understanding.
And then maybe Mr. Schutz, I'm trying to help, but I'm not sure I actually did.
I think you did somewhat, thank you. In response to the availability of water from Shasta, is it excuse me, in response to the availability of water exchanges or other operations with sites reservoir, is it possible that reclamation could change its operations as compared to the baseline operations in the no action alternative?
Objection, vague, calls for speculation.
I'm going to say overruled to the extent you understand it, Mr. Whittington. It asks whether it's possible. I think that's narrows thing down.
Yes, I suppose it is possible.
As of today, are there any constraints placed by the Sites Authority on how reclamation uses the water that it, as you called it, backs up into Shasta Reservoir?
Objection calls for a legal conclusion, unless he's asking with respect to the model.
I'm asking with respect to the model.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I think I can. Does the Sites Authority have any control over how reclamation uses the water backed up from sites into Shasta Reservoir?
In the modeling.
In the modeling.
Well, I'll say objection vague. And assumes facts not in evidence with respect to the authority's control over reclamation in the model. Do we ever establish? Yeah.
Let's try to get at this in a different way. When you modeled exchanges between sites and Shasta Reservoir, the model told you all told the model how it should operate in response to the availability of water backed up. Now, you've explained that part of that is storage partner water that would be released from sites in April through June, and then a corresponding amount would be released from Shasta in August through November, correct? Mr. Whittington?
Oh, sorry. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And there are evidently some other rules that were coded into the model that allowed reclamation to do other things with the water other than that operation that I just described. Is that correct?
Sorry, to clarify, are we referring just to the Shasta exchange separate from CVP OpFlex?
What do you call it? CVP OpFlex?
Yeah, OpFlex for operational flexibility.
Operational flexibility. So no, I'm referring to the CVP operational flexibility. Is that not described here on slide 4? Is that separate and distinct?
Yeah, it is separate from this.
Okay. And is there a description of that somewhere that we could look at?
I believe there is some description included in chapter 2 of the project alternatives, and there should be some description included in appendix 5B of the modeling assumptions for surface water.
You know, as a general rule, Mr. Whittington, I looked for such things and I found things like this that sort of said what sort of the general constraints are, but not affirmatively what the model was told to do. Is it your opinion that the specific instructions for the model are presented in this Appendix 5B that I missed?
It is a summarization of what's implemented in the model.
Okay.
Mr. Schutz. Right?
I think I'm done with this particular line, and I have unless someone had something to add. Didn't hear who that was.
Yes, this is Mr. Mecco. I'd like
Sure,
to
thank you.
add something just to help you. In terms of general rules of the operation for federal participation in the modeling, you can find that in Appendix 5A1 written out. And then I believe Mr. Whittington, I believe Mr. Whittington's correct that there may be a more condensed version of that same description in Appendix 5B.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll have a look. So could we go please to slide 5?
And Mr. Schutz, I'm not, I appreciate your
I
line
don't have much more time.
Okay, I just wanted to see if we should break or if we should go ahead and move through the rest.
I don't think we'll have more than 15 minutes.
Okay, great. Let's continue.
I'm trying to do this as efficiently as I can. It is technically challenging.
It is very difficult. It's challenging. I appreciate that.
So I want to call your attention to the figure toward the bottom right under net delta outflow index, long-term average difference, 1,000 acre feet per year. It says -620. Does that mean that the average difference in net delta outflow index averaged over the entire period of record is a reduction in the outflow as measured by NDOI of 620,000 acre feet?
Yes, that's my interpretation of this chart.
Okay. And generally speaking, can you describe to us this page doesn't have a title. Can you tell us what we're looking at here as a general, and if we were to have a title, what might the title say?
CalSim II simulation study to approximate historic trends. Yeah, so this table was part of the publication of the model, I believe, in 2003, and there was a CalSim II simulation conducted to try to estimate historic trends to determine whether CalSim was a reasonable tool for water resource planning.
Thank you. Okay. Can we move ahead to some of the bar graphs? I don't have the figures. Why don't you go to there you go. Very good. Perfect. So Mr. Whittington, in this and several subsequent slides, you have bar graphs that look at average annual results, correct?
Correct.
Now, the annual results, as you're looking at volumes, relative to the sites diversions, tend to be large numbers compared to what you might see on a smaller time scale. Is that correct?
Objection vague.
I'm going to sustain that, but let's see if you can try again, Mr. Schutz, and get to your point.
Okay. Is it true that that when that in looking at larger, broader, well, you're going to object to that too. Do you have a figure here for total net delta outflow? Do you recall?
I don't think so. I don't recall that being included. I can try to double check. No, I don't think there is one.
All right, let's look at slide 21, please. And this again is an average annual figure. As you're looking at this number, and this shows the annual flow at Wilkins Slough and the difference. If you were to look at a similar bar graph for net delta outflow, would you expect the differences between the purple line and the purple bar and the black bar to be larger or smaller?
Objection vague.
I don't think that's vague.
I'm going to overrule that objection.
Well, the y-axis, the values would be larger.
Yes.
In relative change between NAA and all three in this are about 1%, and for Wilkins Slough, if we were to look at delta outflow, the numbers would be larger. The relative change would also be around 1%. Reduction in all three as compared to NAA.
Oh, you're saying that let me ask that differently. Wouldn't the inflow from sources other than the Sacramento River tend to reduce the percent of difference between NAA and all three?
Objection vague. Which other tributaries?
All of them. NDOI encompasses all of them.
Mr. Whittington, are you able to answer that question? Do you have enough information in the question to answer that question?
I'm not sure. Sorry, could you repeat it one more time for me? Thanks.
Sure. If you were to look at this, a similar graph for NDOI, wouldn't the incremental difference made by sites be relatively smaller than it is at this location at Wilkins Slough, which is farther upstream?
Well, as I said, I believe that our modeling results show relative changes between the two being similar at Wilkins Slough and delta outflow, around the 1% change.
Okay, that's fine. If you were to look at the incremental differences at specific times of year, for instance, of places of and times of biological concern, is it likely that you'd be seeing different a greater difference between the NAA and the alternative 3 results?
Objection, vague.
I think that's fair, but let me try the question. I'm not sure it'll be better. You can object to me, Mr. Ferguson. I won't be offended. I'll try, Mr. Whittington, and you can tell me if the question makes sense. But if you were to break down this chart into months, and were to look at any particular month, is it possible that is it possible that the purple line and I don't know what, is it black? The purple line and the black line would have a larger difference between the two?
Yes, that is correct. So generally during the diversion season, you would see, so that would be in the months of, primarily in the winter time, you would see a little bit more of a reduction from alternative 3. And then looking at months in the summer when sites is providing releases, you would see generally a slight increase to river flows downstream of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Whittington. Back to you, Mr. Schutz.
And thank you, Ms. Kenzie. Mr. Whittington, isn't it true that use of CalSim II rather than CalSim III does not incorporate the extreme hydrology and drying that has occurred in California since the end of the CalSim II period of record in 2003?
It is. I was just going to say it is correct that CalSim runs hydrologic conditions from water year 1921 through 2003.
And the period of record for CalSim III, do you know what that is?
It is extended from 2003 through 2021.
Thank you. I have 2 questions for Dr. Sadat, and then I'll be done. Dr. Sadat, when you were developing the temperature evaluations for the Calusa Basin drain and the Tehama, let's start with, for the Tehama-Calusa Canal, did you base the temperature the evaluation of heating on measured temperature data that you took in the canal?
The sites release temperature blending tool uses 2 measured time series of measured data, which one is at Nice Landing and Richcott, and one is in the Sacramento River. So we did not use a measured temperature at the canal.
And so at Knight's Landing Ridge Cut is on the Calusa Basin drain, and that's fairly close to the Sacramento River, is that correct?
They are just, yeah, approximately close. It's downstream of Calusa Basin Drain.
Okay, but there's part of the Calusa Basin drain upstream where you don't have measured data, is that correct?
That is correct, because we did not find any measured data along those canals in the Sacramento Valley.
And you didn't place temperature loggers or anything in the canals in order to develop at least a short measured record?
I did not, and I'm not aware if anyone else did.
And who might have the anyone else have been if it were not you?
The like DWR or like Sites Authority or anyone else who collect the data, which I'm not sure exactly who's collecting those data, but as far as we checked all the records when this tool was developed, there wasn't any available data.
All right, thank you very much. That's all I have, Ms. Kinsey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. We are now at 12:19, so I would like to go ahead and take our lunch break. Before we do break, are there any procedural questions or issues that we should address?
Ms. Kinsey, would you mind requesting time estimates from the cross-examiners that remain for this panel?
That's a good idea. Are there others with the coordinating NGO parties who plan to ask questions?
I do. This is Eric Busher for San Francisco Baykeeper. I will have less than an hour, maybe significantly less, depending on how quickly the answers go.
Understood. Thank you. And then I imagine what I'm calling the Delta parties I know they will have questions. Let's see, Mr. Rees, are you here or?
I'm here. Yes. Yes, we will have probably estimate of an hour and a half to hour and 40 minutes.
And does that include Mr. Herrick's questions? And you mentioned possibly Ms. Meserve would have questions?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. And then I see your hand, Ms. Mendel Rice. We'll come to you, but I'll down this line. Mr. King, do you anticipate having questions for this panel?
Yes, I'm sorry, my computer crashed, so I'm on my iPhone. But I imagine 30 minutes.
Thank you.
That's all I have left. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And Mr. Ornbaum, do you anticipate having questions for this panel? Sometimes the space bar works too, to get off mute.
No. Yes, I anticipate having questions.
Do you have a guesstimate of how many questions you might have, or how long you might go?
Half an hour, 45 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Based on that, it seems likely we will not get to panel 5 today, right? If we're skipping panel 4. So I don't know if you're looking for more assurance than that, but it seems likely to me we'll be doing well if we get through this panel today.
That's helpful. Thank you. I mean, panel 5 can be ready today, but
okay,
if they need to be.
Thank you. Ms. Mendel Rice.
Thank you. And this is not a request that relates to this panel as far as state water contractors are concerned, since we've already asked our cross-examination questions. But I wanted to put this in your mind and give you some time to think about it. We know that you've ordered us in this particular way based on these groupings of parties, but in hearing kind of the extensive amount of cross-examination of some of the other parties, it occurs to me that it might be helpful for state water contractors if on cross-examination that relates to the sites witnesses, if we could go at the end. We don't anticipate having very many questions at all, and it might just be helpful to have the other parties go first on cross. for the forthcoming panels.
I love that you think your current things is appropriate.
I think that's a good, that seems like a good idea. So we will, thank you for
Really
that.
good idea.
And, I think that would make sense going forward. Mr. Soderlund, did you have a similar request or something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to support that request. I think as this hearing progresses, I think it makes the most sense.
That makes sense to me. So we can do that going forward. Mr. Reese.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't support the request, or I object to the request. I don't know why we would make a change now. Unless there's an agreement between the parties, and I'm not aware of an agreement, at least not from our end.
So Mr. Reese, why do you object?
I don't know why we would change the process now to allow them to have
It's further redirect.
yeah, I mean that would be on further redirect. If, as far as I'm concerned, that's what they would be doing. I don't know why we would change it now. I just don't see the fairness in doing that.
Okay, so I was just trying to get to the point. So your concern is that because generally speaking, the DWR, the Bureau, and state water contractors support the project, that it's
correct.
not a form of redirect. I just want to understand Mr. Busher.
Yeah, I join in Mr. Reese's concern. The other thing I'd add is, with respect to the first panel, we were prevented, and I don't think this was wrong, but we were prevented from asking subsequent either recross or cross-examination questions that were beyond the scope of redirect. If the state water contractors or DWR, the Bureau, who are aligned with sites in this process, are going to be asking questions after we get the opportunity to, we have to have an opportunity to respond to that. I think it makes more sense to keep it in the same order through all the, friendly direct first, and then allow for the cross-examination. But if we want to follow up to questions from the state water contractors or DWR, right, that's not redirect technically. That's just additional cross that happens after we've gone, and that puts us in an unfair and prejudicial spot.
Mr. Mooney.
Yeah, I just also object. I just reiterate everything that's being said. It just seems like this is an effort to basically maybe rehabilitate a witness or something through cross, when that really should be being done by redirect, and knowing that they're aligned interest. So it seems like if you're sandwiching the protestants between the applicant and those that support the applicant, that just seems to go against the way we've prepared and thought about this going forward, and again, seems prejudicial to us.
Mr. King, do you have more to add to this?
Yeah, I agree with Mr.
Can of worms here. So I don't think Ms. Mandel-Rice did either, but go ahead, Mr. King.
I agree with Ms. Mooney and on Ms. Busher and all the other people. We're not having the chance to actually talk to DWR or US Bureau or the parties that support the project in its current form. And if they're going to ask questions, we should be able to know what questions they're going to ask before we have a chance to ask our questions. Thank you.
Ms. Mandel-Rice.
I would just note that we're in a slightly different posture than the Bureau or DWR, right? State Water Contractors was a protestant. In this case, we have settled, but we wanted to remain a party for a very kind of limited reason, which is to, ensure, right, that the terms of our settlement were, carried through this proceeding, being the primary reason. So I think we're in a slightly different posture than the Bureau and DWR. Generally, I would look to Mr. Ferguson and Mr. Hitchings if they would have a concern about if state water contractors, the Bureau and DWR did move to the end of the line just for purposes of cross-examination of the site's witnesses, if they would have a concern about allowing recross related to the Bureau's, DWR's, and state water contractors cross-examination. That might just be one way to fix this problem, but I welcome their opinions on this as well.
Thank you. Mr. Hitchings.
Yes, thank you. I think that does start to get complicated to then provide an opportunity for essentially limited recross on what is cross. And so, you know, we would not support that approach where, and so we leave it to the hearing officer to manage this in the most efficient way possible. I just also want to note that this was not a request that was discussed with Sites Council beforehand, so I didn't want there to be any implication or concern that this was somehow, you know, there was a collaboration on this request. Obviously, the parties that requested, they have their unique interests, and they made a request to support that. But I wanted to make sure that was clear for the record.
Thank you. Understood. I think what I'll do now is just take it under advisement. We don't need to make a decision until the next panel in any case. So Ms. Auftenberg.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask that we be called out separately instead of as a group, because I'm not aware of any group questions. So each reclamation and DWR are all acting independently. So I just wanted to make that pretty clear.
I can do that. It's not a great cost savings for me to.
Yeah, right.
So that's fair enough.
Thank you.
Do that. Thank you. All right, with that, is there anything else we need to address before we all go to lunch? All right, I am going to continue with our 1 hour. I think it's well deserved. And we all have other things to do. So let's plan to reconvene at 1:30 and we will pick up with cross-examination. Be prepared also to log back into the Zoom at 1:30. Thank you.